What happens when the most powerful woman in the room falls for the one man who never tried to impress her? Victoria Hale built $1 billion empire from nothing, and Adrian Cole wanted to own every piece of it, including her. Daniel Carter never asked for anything he didn't earn with his own two hands. Two worlds, one storm, and a single sentence spoken in the dark that neither of them could take back. If you weren't busy raising a child, I'd probably ask you out. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Like, subscribe, and don't go anywhere. This one's worth every minute. The alarm on Daniel Carter's phone went off at 4:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before it was supposed to. He lay still for a moment in the pale darkness of his bedroom, staring at the water stain on the ceiling he kept meaning to fix. A brown oval the size of a dinner plate that had appeared last March when the upstairs unit had a leak. The landlord had patched the pipe. The stain remained. Every morning, Daniel woke up and looked at it. Every morning he thought, I'll get to that this weekend. He never did. There was always something more urgent. There was always Lily. He reached over and silenced the phone before the second buzz could travel down the narrow hallway and wake her. That was the first act of his every day. Protect Lily's sleep. Everything else came after. Daniel sat up slowly, the way a man does when his body has accumulated years of physical labor, the way a wall accumulates paint, layer by layer, each one slightly heavier than the last. He was 32 years old, but some mornings his knees disagreed. He rolled his shoulders, heard the familiar pop, and stood. The apartment was small. That was the honest word for it. Not cozy, not charming, small. A two-bedroom on the second floor of a building on Hartwell Street in a suburb just outside Columbus, Ohio, where the trees were old and the sidewalks were cracked and nobody bothered anyone much. Daniel paid $940 a month for it. He had been paying that same amount for 4 years because his landlord, Mr. Petrosian, was a 71-year-old Armenian man who believed that a reliable tenant who paid on time and never complained was worth more than an extra $50 a month. Daniel was always on time. Daniel never complained. He moved through the kitchen in the dark, not because he had to, but because he had memorized every inch of this space the way a sailor memorizes the contours of a beloved coast. 3 steps from the bedroom door to the refrigerator. 2 steps left to the coffee maker. He filled the reservoir, measured out the grounds. 2.5 scoops, never 3, never 2. And pressed the button. The machine sputtered awake, filling the quiet apartment with the low groan of water heating and the first dark breath of morning coffee. While it brewed, he walked to the small window above the kitchen sink and looked out. The street below was empty. A single street lamp cast its orange cone of light over the wet pavement. It had rained sometime in the night. He could see the shimmer of it. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and went silent. The suburb was still mostly asleep. Daniel Carter stood there for a moment in his undershirt and work pants, hands resting on the edge of the sink, and allowed himself 30 seconds of nothing. No plan, no list, no responsibility. Just the rain-washed street and the smell of coffee and the quiet that existed only in the space between night and morning. Then the 30 seconds ended, and he turned back to his day. Passé. He had been an HVAC technician for going on 9 years. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning, the invisible infrastructure of comfort that everyone depended on and no one ever thought about until it stopped working. Daniel had started as an apprentice at 19, fresh out of community college, taking the certification because it was practical and the work was steady, and his own father had told him once, "Son, people will always need heat in the winter and cold air in the summer. That's a job that doesn't disappear." His father had been right about that at least, even if he'd been wrong about most everything else. Daniel was good at the work, more than good. He was the kind of technician that building managers requested by name, the kind that other guys called when a system was being difficult and no one could figure out why. He had a particular patience with broken things, an almost meditative willingness to sit with a problem until it revealed itself, rather than forcing a solution that would only create a new problem 3 months later. His supervisor, Marcus Webb, had told him more than once, "You've got the gift, Carter. Most guys fight the equipment. You listen to it." Daniel didn't think of it as a gift. He thought of it as necessity. When you were responsible for a child's life, you learned fast that rushing always cost you more in the end. You learned that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a strategy. By 6:15, he had drunk his coffee, showered, pulled on his work uniform, dark gray pants, a company shirt with the Apex Climate Solutions logo stitched over the left breast pocket, and packed his lunch. He made 2 sandwiches every morning, turkey and Swiss on whole wheat, one for himself and one cut into triangles for Lily because she refused to eat sandwiches cut in rectangles, a preference that had emerged from nowhere when she was 4 and had never wavered. He set her sandwich in a small container in the refrigerator with her name written on a piece of masking tape in black marker, even though she was the only child in the apartment and the tape was unnecessary. He did it anyway. He liked the small ritual of it. He liked writing her name. Lily. 6 letters. The only word he had ever written that felt genuinely important. He put on his tool belt, checked that his keys were in his pocket, and walked quietly down the hallway to her room. He opened the door just an inch, just enough to see the small shape of her beneath her yellow comforter, dark hair fanned out across the pillow, one arm wrapped around a stuffed elephant named Gerald that was missing an eye and had been repaired twice with a needle and thread. He stood there for exactly 10 seconds. He had counted once and then kept counting ever since. Though he couldn't have explained why 10 seconds was the right amount of time. It simply was. She was breathing slowly, peacefully. The nightlight cast a warm amber glow across her face. I'm doing this for you, he thought, the way he thought it every single morning. All of it is for you. Then he pulled the door quietly closed and left for work. The day was long in the way that only physical labor understands, not the sustained dull ache of 8 hours at a desk, but the sharp accumulating exhaustion of a body that has been used hard. Daniel replaced 2 compressor units in a medical building on the east side, diagnosed a failing thermostat in a restaurant where the kitchen staff had been sweating through a week of inadequate ventilation, and spent 2 hours in a crawl space beneath a grocery store untangling a drainage blockage that had been incorrectly diagnosed by the previous technician as a refrigerant leak. He worked without complaint. He worked with precision. He texted Marcus a status update at noon and received back, "Good work, Carter. Get some rest tonight." He did not get some rest that night. His phone rang at 4:23 in the afternoon while he was loading equipment back into the van. The number was unfamiliar. A Columbus area code, but not a number he recognized. He almost let it go to voicemail. He almost always let unknown numbers go to voicemail. Something made him answer. "Carter." "Hey, man." "Daniel Carter?" The voice was male, familiar in a way that took him a beat to place. "It's Marcus Okafor. We went to Ohio State together. I sat behind you in Professor Hadley's economics lecture sophomore year. You used to lend me your notes." Daniel leaned against the van and searched his memory. Marcus Okafor. Long limbs, always wore a red OSU pullover, could fall asleep sitting completely upright. "Yeah." "Marcus," he said. "It's been a while. How are you?" "Good, good. Listen, I'll cut straight to it because I know you're probably still working. I'm managing a building project downtown. Small commercial property on Meridian Avenue. Building had some roof damage from last month's hailstorm, and the owner wants it addressed fast before it becomes a structural issue. The roofing crew is already contracted, but they need someone who can assess the HVAC impact and handle any ductwork that got compromised. I thought of you. Good money, Daniel. Couple of days minimum, maybe more if there's more damage than the initial inspection showed. You interested?" Daniel calculated quickly. He had 2 service calls scheduled for Thursday morning, but nothing after noon. His regular shift ended Friday. "What's the rate?" Marcus told him. It was good money, better than good. "I can be there Wednesday morning," Daniel said. "Perfect. Owner will be on site. Her name is Victoria Hale. She runs a tech company. Very professional, easy to work with from what I've heard. She just wants the building sound again." "Understood. Text me the address." He hung up, finished loading the van, and called Mrs. Garza, the 63-year-old retired schoolteacher 2 floors down who watched Lily on the days Daniel worked late, to confirm she could take Lily Wednesday afternoon. Then he drove to pick up his daughter from aftercare at Lincoln Elementary, where she greeted him at the door with both arms raised, a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a horse wearing a crown clutched in her right hand. "It's a princess horse," she announced. "I can see that," he said, lifting her. "Is the crown made of gold?" She considered this seriously. Rubies, she decided. Gold is too heavy for a horse's head. He carried her to the truck, and she talked about the princess horse the entire drive home, and Daniel listened to every word, and for 40 minutes the long day dissolved completely. Wednesday came cool and overcast, the kind of Columbus autumn morning where the sky couldn't decide between gray and white, and settled for both. Daniel arrived at the address on Meridian Avenue at 7:50, 10 minutes before he'd been asked to come. He parked the van and got out, studying the building. It was a 3-story commercial property, not large by downtown standards, maybe 12,000 square feet, faced in red brick that had been recently cleaned with large windows on the first floor and a modest glass entrance. A discreet brass plate beside the door read, "Hale Meridian Partners." The building had good bones. You could see that from the street, but the storm damage was also visible from the street. A section of the flat roof on the east side had clearly taken a serious hit, and there were areas where the flashing around the HVAC equipment on the rooftop had been lifted or torn. Daniel pulled out his clipboard and began making initial notes before he'd even walked inside. He liked to form his own assessment first, before anyone told him what they thought the problem was. In his experience, people who told you what they believed was wrong before you'd looked often kept you from finding what was actually wrong. He was crouched beside the building's east exterior wall, examining where a downspout had been partially detached, when he heard the front door open. He expected a building manager, or perhaps a contractor coordinator, maybe Marcus. He did not expect what he got. She walked out in jeans and a heather gray cashmere sweater, no jacket despite the chill, a coffee cup in one hand and a slim tablet in the other. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a practical knot, and she was looking up at the damaged roofline with an expression that mixed frustration with careful assessment. The face of someone who was genuinely trying to understand a problem, not just waiting for someone else to solve it. She was somewhere around 30, Daniel guessed. Strong jaw, focused eyes that were currently aimed upward at the section of damaged parapet wall, dark enough to read as nearly black in the flat morning light. She was taller than average and held herself with the particular posture of someone who was accustomed to occupying the center of a room, whether they intended to or not. She hadn't noticed Daniel yet. He watched her for a moment, just a moment, professional assessment only, and what he noticed was not what he had expected from the description tech company CEO. He had formed an image, polished, impatient, the kind of person who hired people to stand where she was standing right now so she didn't have to. Instead, this woman was actively studying the damage herself, her lips pressed together in concentration, the morning wind pulling small strands of hair across her cheek. "Miss Hale?" he said, straightening. She turned. The assessment in her eyes shifted instantly from the building to him, quick, precise, the same evaluative intelligence she'd been directing at the parapet. "Yes." She walked toward him, and her handshake was firm. "You're Daniel Carter." "I am. HVAC assessment and ductwork repair. Marcus Okafor arranged it." "Right." She glanced at his clipboard. "You were already taking notes." "I always try to look before I listen. Nothing against what you've been told, but the building usually tells its own story." Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something more considered than that, as if he'd said something she'd need to think about later. "Fair enough," she said. "What do you need for me to get started?" "Rooftop access, then the mechanical room if you have one. I need to see what units are up there and check if any ductwork connections on the east side were compromised. Third-floor stairwell takes you to the roof access door. I'll get you the code." She typed something on her tablet, and his phone buzzed with a text. "Mechanical room is in the basement. I'll walk you down." She turned and led him inside, and Daniel followed, and he noticed two things. First, that she walked the way she stood, like someone who owned whatever space she was in without making a performance of it. And second, that the building's lobby, while professionally appointed with clean lines and modest furnishings, had a small coffee set up in the corner from which the smell of good coffee was emanating with considerable authority. He approved of both observations. The damage was worse than the initial inspection report had suggested. Daniel spent the first morning doing a thorough assessment, rooftop, ductwork, mechanical room, all of it. And what he found was not catastrophic, but was more layered than a quick patch job would address. The hailstorm had done visible work on the flat roof membrane, which was expected, but the impact had also stressed two of the exterior ductwork connections on the east elevation and cracked the mounting bracket on the building's second rooftop unit, the one that handled the second-floor offices. There was also water infiltration along a seam where the damaged flashing had allowed moisture to travel downward, and that moisture had reached the top of one of the vertical supply ducts in a way that was going to require not just sealing, but a section replacement. He compiled his findings on the clipboard, organized them in order of urgency, and went looking for Victoria Hale. He found her in a second-floor office that he estimated was her main working space. Large desk, multiple monitors, the wall behind her covered in a combination of whiteboards and framed documents that Daniel didn't look at long enough to read. She was on a phone call, standing at the window with her back to the door, and she held up one finger without turning around to acknowledge she'd heard him come in. He waited in the hallway. 3 minutes passed. He used the time to write up his preliminary repair plan. He could hear her voice through the open door, low, controlled, clipped in the way that indicated she was managing a difficult conversation and doing it without losing composure. He couldn't make out the words. He didn't try. When she appeared in the doorway, she looked mildly apologetic. "Sorry, investor call." "No problem." He handed her the clipboard. "That's everything I found in priority order. Top 3 items need to be addressed before the next rain, or you risk the water infiltration getting significantly worse. The ductwork on item 4 can wait a week or so without serious consequence, but not much longer." She read through his notes, and she read them carefully. Not skimming, actually reading, occasionally returning to re-examine something she'd passed. He found himself watching her face as she read. "This is more than what the initial report said," she said. "Most buildings have more problems than the initial report says. That's not a criticism of whoever did the first look. Hail damage is complicated. The impact distributes through a structure in ways that aren't always visible on the surface." "How long to complete all of this?" 2 solid days for the priority items. The ductwork replacement could be a 3rd day. Depends on what I find when I get into the ceiling section. She returned the clipboard to him. "Then plan for 3 days. I want it done right." She paused. "Can you start today?" "I already ordered the materials for items 1 and 2, he said. "They'll be here by noon." She looked at him again with that expression that wasn't quite a smile. "Good," she said. And then, simply, "Do you want more coffee? I was about to make a second pot." He had been awake since 4:47 in the morning. He had a cracked bracket to replace, and a ductwork infiltration to address, and materials arriving in 2 hours. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." The morning established a rhythm. Daniel worked, and Victoria worked, and the building moved quietly around them both. He spent 3 hours on the roof, methodical and unhurried, the October wind steady off the open sky above downtown Columbus. He could see the city from up there, the familiar skyline, modest by major city standards, but solid and substantial, the kind of skyline that belonged to a place that took itself seriously without overreaching. He had always liked Columbus. He had grown up 40 minutes outside it in a smaller town and moved toward it the way people move toward light. At noon, the materials arrived, and he spent an hour organizing them in the staging area he'd set up in the small ground-floor storage room Victoria had made available. Shortly after noon, she appeared at the door of the storage room. She was carrying 2 tall glasses of iced water, real glasses, not disposable cups. The kind of small detail that felt like deliberate courtesy rather than thoughtless habit. A slice of lemon on the rim of each. "I would have asked what you wanted, but I didn't want to interrupt you on the roof," she said, offering him one. He set down the length of ducting he'd been measuring and took the glass. "This is great. Thank you." She handed the other to the roofing contractor who had arrived an hour earlier to begin the membrane repair, a compact man named Hector who nodded gratefully and retreated toward his work. Victoria remained for a moment. She leaned against the door frame with her own glass, looking at the organized staging area, the tools laid out, the neatly labeled materials. "You're very organized," she said. "It was an observation, not flattery." "Saves time." Daniel crouched to continue measuring. "Disorganized workspace is how you spend 20 minutes looking for a tool you already have. I tell my engineers the same thing about their code architecture," she said. He looked up at that. "You code?" "I did. Not much anymore. Company got too big." Now I mostly manage people who code. She said it without complaint, but there was something under the words, a faint resistance, like someone acknowledging a trade they weren't entirely at peace with. Do you miss it? He asked. The question seemed to surprise her. Not offense, surprise, the kind that comes when someone asks something you weren't expecting to be asked. Yes, she said, after a beat. Sometimes I miss it very much. She looked at his hands briefly. The calluses, the work gloves folded over his belt, the pencil tucked behind his ear. Do you like what you do? Most days. What about the other days? He considered the question honestly rather than reflexively. The other days I like that I'm good at it, he said. That's usually enough. She was quiet for a moment. That's a very sane way to think about work, she said. Then her phone rang, that same controlled tone she'd used on the investor call, and she straightened from the door frame with the practiced regret of someone accustomed to being interrupted. Excuse me, she said. Of course. He turned back to his measurements, but he was still thinking about the question. Do you miss it? And her answer, and the particular quality of honesty with which she had said yes. The first day ended at 5:43. Daniel packed up his tools with the same methodical care with which he'd unpacked them, logged his hours and materials in his report sheet, and was heading for the front entrance when he almost walked directly into Victoria. She was coming out of the stairwell carrying a box of files, and she misjudged the weight shift on the bottom step and stumbled slightly. Nothing serious. She caught herself immediately against the wall, but the box lurched, and Daniel's hands were simply there, catching it before the files could scatter across the lobby floor. They stood for half a second with both their hands on the box, faces closer than any previous moment of the day, and their eyes met with the sudden awareness of proximity. I've got it, she said quietly. I know, he said. He let go. She steadied the box, recovered her composure with the fluency of someone who had been recovering composure in public for years, and offered a short, self-deprecating laugh. Long day? She said. Very long day, he agreed. How bad is it upstairs, honestly? Honestly? The priority repairs will hold. The water infiltration is concerning, but you caught it before it became catastrophic. You've got good bones in this building. She looked at him steadily. People keep telling me that buildings either have good bones or they don't, and there's not much you can do about it either way. I'm not sure I believe that. It matters, Daniel said. Good bones don't mean nothing goes wrong. It means what goes wrong can be fixed, and the fixing holds. A brief silence. Outside, a car passed on Meridian Avenue. The lobby was still. Same time tomorrow? She asked. 7:50, he said. I'll have coffee on. He drove home thinking about nothing in particular. That was his usual state at the end of a workday, a deliberate mental emptiness, a kind of decompression. He had learned over years of long days that the drive home was a transition, and transitions required space. You couldn't move from physical exhaustion directly into fatherhood without the pause. You would bring the wrong version of yourself through the door, and Lily deserved the best version he could manage. So he drove in silence, past the fast food signs and the gas stations and the shopping centers that constituted the commercial ribbon between downtown and the suburb, and he let the day release itself. He picked Lily up from Mrs. Garza's apartment at 6:20. She was sitting on the old woman's couch watching a nature documentary with the intensity of a doctoral student. Mrs. Garza made it a policy to show Lily educational programming, a policy Lily had accepted with only moderate protest and eventual genuine interest. There was a fish today that eats with its face pointed up, Lily reported as Daniel buckled her into her booster seat. Which fish? I don't remember its name, but its face points up. That sounds like a bitterling, maybe, or a bronze corridorus. Some catfish hold their heads like that. She considered this. Do you know everything about fish? I know a little about a lot of things, he said. Mrs. Garza knows a lot about a lot of things, too, Lily said. She told me she was a teacher for 37 years. She was a very good one. Did you know her when she was a teacher? No, baby. I met her when we moved in. Oh. She thought about this. Sometimes I forget that you had a whole life before me. Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Small face, large dark eyes, entirely serious. I did, he said. But it wasn't the good part. She looked satisfied by this. She turned back to the window and watched the streetlights begin to come on as the early dark fell. Thursday morning. He arrived again at 7:50. She had coffee on, as promised. A real coffee, dark roast, in one of the building's actual mugs, left on the small table just inside the entrance with a brief sticky note. Back at 8:15. Make yourself at home. He did not make himself at home. The phrase was a politeness, not an invitation. But he took the coffee and climbed to the roof and began the second day's work with the comfort of a hot drink against the October morning air. And he thought briefly and without particular intent about a woman who told an HVAC technician she barely knew to make himself at home, and meant it. The day was longer and more technical than the first. The cracked mounting bracket required a complete replacement rather than the reinforcement Daniel had initially hoped might be sufficient. He found on close inspection that the metal had stress fractures running deeper than the surface crack, and doing the repair halfway would simply mean doing it again in 4 months. He ordered the correct bracket from a supplier Marcus had an account with, which meant a 3-hour delay in the afternoon while he attended to the ductwork infiltration instead. The ductwork was in the east wall cavity, accessible through a ceiling panel in the second-floor corridor, and it required Daniel to work on his back with his hands above his head in a space that was tight enough to be uncomfortable without being impossible. He had worked in worse. He worked steadily, replacing the compromised section, sealing the joint with professional-grade mastic, reinforcing the connection with drawbands, testing the seal. He was coming back down the ladder at 2:30 when he heard a small voice. "What's in the ceiling?" He turned. Lily was sitting on the corridor floor, cross-legged, looking up at the open ceiling panel with enormous curiosity. He stared. "Lily." He stepped off the ladder and crouched to her level. "What are you... Where's Mrs. Garza?" His mind was already running through the sequence. She's supposed to be at school. Today is Thursday. Aftercare doesn't end until... "Mrs. Garza's back hurt," Lily said calmly. "She called you, but you were in the ceiling, so she called the school, and they called Mrs. Peterson, and Mrs. Peterson called Daddy's work number. And the work number said, 'Call the job site number, and the job site number is this place.'" She gestured at the corridor around her with the authority of someone who had followed the logic carefully. "So here I am." Daniel exhaled. He checked his phone. 4 missed calls, 2 texts. He looked back at his daughter, who was still examining the open ceiling panel. "You came by yourself?" "Mrs. Garza's neighbor drove me. She's downstairs." Lily finally looked at him instead of the ceiling. "What is in the ceiling, though?" "Ducts. For air. Like the throat of the building. Air moves through them the same way breath moves through you." She absorbed this. "Did the building have a sore throat?" "Something like that. I fixed it." "Good." She stood, smoothing her school uniform skirt with the practical dignity she had somehow developed at age 6. "Can I see where you work?" "You can sit with me while I clean up." He took her hand. "And then we're going to figure out the rest of the afternoon." He was carrying his supply bag and holding Lily's hand when he came around the corner and found Victoria standing in the first-floor hallway, a tablet in one hand, looking at the small girl with an expression he couldn't immediately read. Something between surprise and a stillness that was different from her usual composed attention. "I'm sorry," Daniel said immediately. "I have a situation. My sitter had a back issue. My daughter was brought here because I wasn't answering my phone. I'll be out of your way in 10 minutes. "You don't need to apologize," Victoria said. She looked at Lily. "Hi." Lily looked at Victoria with the frank, evaluative gaze that small children deploy without self-consciousness. She was assessing this woman, her clothes, her height, the way she stood. "Hi," Lily said. "My name is Lily Carter. I'm 6 3/4. What's your name?" "Victoria?" And then, with something that was genuine rather than performed, "That's a very precise age." 3/4 is a lot," Lily said seriously. "It's almost 7. "It almost is," Victoria agreed. There was something in the quality of her engagement, direct, unhurried, treating the child's observation as worthy of actual response, that Daniel noticed. Not everyone knew how to talk to children. Not everyone tried. "We're heading out," Daniel said. "You still have 2 hours before end of day," Victoria said. She glanced at his supply bag, at the clipboard, at the work clearly still in process. Is there more to finish? The bracket replacement is waiting on a part. Comes in tomorrow morning. Then you'll lose half a day if you leave now. She looked at Lily. If it's all right with your dad, you could sit with me for a while. I have a very large desk and a box of markers that a colleague left here and never retrieved. Does that work? Lily looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Victoria. You don't have to do that, he said. I know, she said. I'm offering. And then directly to Lily, there's also a very good view of a building being constructed across the street. There are cranes. Cranes? Lily's eyes widened. Cranes apparently changed the calculation entirely. 3 of them, Victoria said solemnly. Dad, Lily said, with the simple conviction of someone whose mind has been made up by cranes. That he worked for another hour and 40 minutes. He could hear nothing from Victoria's office, so the building was well insulated, which was a professional detail he noted with approval. But at one point he came back inside for materials and walked past the stairwell and heard a high, clear laugh that was unmistakably Lily, and then a lower laugh that he recognized after a beat as Victoria. He stood in the stairwell for a moment. He didn't analyze the feeling. He didn't name it. He simply registered it. That sound, the 2 of them, the particular quality of easy laughter from behind a closed door. And then he went back to work. When he came to collect Lily at 4:30, he opened the office door to find his daughter standing at the large whiteboard on the side wall, a marker in each hand, completing what appeared to be a sprawling artwork involving the princess horse from her crayon drawing, 3 cranes, and a figure with long dark hair that Lily had clearly labeled Vic-tree-u-8 in large, phonetically rendered capital letters. Victoria was seated at her desk, still working, but with the slightly unfocused ease of someone who had been doing 2 things at once, working and listening to a child narrate an evolving artwork for an hour and not minding it. She looked up when Daniel came in. She's a very thorough explainer, Victoria said. She gets that from somewhere, Daniel said. The horse has been named Rubina, Victoria reported. Lily says the name came to her while she was thinking about rubies. She's been developing this horse for some time, Daniel said. He looked at the board, at the careful letters, at Vic-tree-u-8. We'll get this cleaned up. Leave it, Victoria said. She was looking at the board with an expression he couldn't fully interpret. Lily, Daniel said, thank Ms. Hale. Lily turned and, with the gravity of a small diplomat completing a formal occasion, walked to Victoria's desk and extended her right hand. Victoria took it seriously. She shook it. Thank you for the markers, Lily said, and the cranes. Thank you for Rubina, Victoria said. I think she improves the whiteboard. Lily appeared deeply satisfied by this assessment. She retrieved her backpack from the chair where she'd left it, took Daniel's hand, and walked with him to the door. Daniel paused. He wasn't sure why. Some reflex of courtesy, perhaps, or something else he wasn't ready to identify. Thank you, he said simply. That helped. Victoria looked at him across her desk. The afternoon light was coming through the windows behind her, and she had a strand of hair across her cheek from where she'd been leaning over the desk, and the whiteboard behind her had his daughter's artwork on it in bold marker strokes. She's wonderful, Victoria said. And the way she said it, not as a social pleasantry, but as a thing she had actually decided, made it impossible to answer with anything simple. So he didn't try. Tomorrow morning, he said. 7:50, she said. He led Lily down the corridor and out through the lobby and into the October afternoon. The 3rd day. The replacement bracket arrived at 7:30. Daniel was already on site when the delivery came, already had his tools staged, was already on the roof when the mounting hardware was handed up to him. He worked steadily and precisely. The installation took 4 hours and required him to improvise one connecting piece from materials he had, which he did without particular drama. Improvisation was just another form of problem solving, and problem solving was most of what the job actually was. Victoria brought water up to the roof at noon, not through a third party, herself. She climbed the rooftop access stairs with 2 bottles of water and appeared through the access door, blinking in the flat gray noon light, and handed him one. You didn't have to climb up here, he said. I wanted to see what you're dealing with, she said. She walked carefully to where she could observe the unit he'd been working on. She looked at the bracket, the connections, the whole assembly. That's the piece that was cracked? The whole thing had to come out. He gestured to the discarded bracket against the parapet wall. See the fractures? Those ran deep. If I'd just reinforced the surface, you'd have had a complete failure in winter when the thermal expansion and contraction started working on it. She crouched and examined the old bracket with genuine interest. She ran her finger along one of the stress fractures. It looks like it's been like this for a while. Before the storm. Almost certainly. The storm was the trigger, but this was building. She stood and looked at the Columbus skyline for a moment. From up here you could see more of it. The river. The highway interchange to the east. The stadium. Do you ever get tired of it? She asked. The same things breaking in the same ways? Not really. Things don't break in the same ways, they break in the same categories, but every building has its own specific version of the problem. He tightened a connection. I'd rather work on something different every time than do the same thing the same way every day. But you could do more, she said. It wasn't a challenge, it was a must. It was a statement, and it had a question inside it. He looked at her. More than what? He asked. She seemed to reconsider the angle of her own question. I'm not saying this work isn't... It's a fair question, he said. I had the grades to go a different direction. I chose this one. He went back to the connection he was tightening. Lily came along when I was 24. Before that, I'd been thinking about engineering school. After that, I needed work that paid steadily and was available and that I could build a life around. This was that. He paused. I don't think of it as settling. I think of it as choosing. A beat of quiet between them. The wind came off the open sky. I think there's something very clear about the way you understand your own life, she said. He glanced at her. She was watching him with an expression that was neither polite nor professional, but simply and directly human. The face of someone actually seeing something. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. And in the silence that followed, rooftop, October wind, the city spread below them. Something shifted. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, simply and quietly, the way things shift when you've stopped pretending they haven't been moving. He was descending the exterior ladder at 3:45, tools in bag, work for the day complete, the repair fully done and tested and documented on the report he'd already sent to Marcus, when Victoria appeared below. She had her tablet under her arm and her coffee cup and the particular focused expression she wore when she was thinking about something other than what was in front of her. She was looking up at the east elevation, where the repaired ductwork connections were now neat and sealed, no longer the compromised joints they'd been 3 days ago. He reached the ground and unhooked from the ladder. The job was done. He knew it, and she knew it. He turned to say goodbye. Professional, complete. That would be that. Back to his regular schedule, back to the apartment on Hartwell Street and Lily and Mrs. Garza and the water stain on the ceiling he kept meaning to fix. Victoria spoke first. She said it quietly, conversationally, almost casually, as though she were completing a thought she'd been turning over for a while rather than launching something new. If you weren't busy raising a child, she said, looking up at the building's east wall rather than at him, I'd probably ask you out. The sentence landed with the particular weight of a thing said, with absolute honesty and no strategy attached to it. Daniel went still. The afternoon moved around them. A car on Meridian Avenue, a pigeon landing on the parapet above, the distant sound of the city going about itself. He was aware of all of it and none of it. He looked at her profile. She was still looking at the building, as though she were examining the repair, but she wasn't. The focus in her face wasn't directed at the wall. That's a very specific qualification, he said carefully. She looked at him then. Direct. No retreat. I know, she said, and there it was. Honest, unguarded, and completely, precisely complicated. He thought about Lily, about the life he'd built, about how carefully he'd constructed the walls of it, and how deliberately he'd chosen who to let inside. He thought about a woman bringing iced water to a roofing crew, about laughter behind a closed door, about a whiteboard covered in marker drawings. He thought about a sentence that had been said with no expectation of a particular response, and the uncommon bravery of that. He didn't know what to say, so he said the honest thing. It's a hell of a qualification, he said quietly. Victoria looked at him for another moment. Then she looked back at the building, and something at the corner of her mouth, not a smile exactly, but the cousin of one, shifted. Neither of them said anything else, but neither of them moved, and the afternoon held them there. Two people, one completed job, and the particular unresolved weight of a true thing said out loud, hanging in the cool October air between them like a question the day had not yet answered. The sentence stayed with Daniel longer than he intended to let it. He told himself on the drive home that it was nothing, a compliment maybe. The kind of thing a person said when they meant to be honest and ended up being more honest than they planned. Victoria Hale was a grown woman running a substantial company, and she had said what she felt, and that was admirable, and it was also clearly accompanied by its own built-in resolution. If you weren't busy raising a child, the qualifier wasn't a loophole. It was the whole point. She'd said it and closed the door in the same breath, and the kindness of that was actually in the closing. She wasn't asking him for anything. She was simply telling him a truth and packaging it in a way that required nothing back. That was what he told himself. He believed it for approximately 45 minutes. Then he picked up Lily from Mrs. Garza's, and she asked him what was for dinner. And he said pasta, and she said, could it be the pasta with the butter and the little bit of garlic? And not too much garlic, Daddy, just the little bit. And he said yes, and something about the complete ordinary domesticity of that exchange, the specific negotiation of garlic quantity, the trust implicit in a child believing her preferences will be honored, made the sentence surface again in his mind with a clarity he couldn't argue away. I'd probably ask you out. He made the pasta with exactly the right amount of garlic. He read Lily 2 chapters of the book she was currently working through, a chapter book about a girl who could communicate with horses, which Lily had selected herself from the school library with the purposefulness of someone who had done extensive research. He did the dishes while she brushed her teeth. He tucked her in and she fell asleep quickly, the way she always did, with the complete physical commitment of a child who has used her body and mind fully for the entire day. Daniel sat on the couch in the small living room in the quiet apartment and looked at the wall for a while. He did not call anyone. He did not text Marcus Okafor, who was the closest thing he had to a mutual contact with Victoria, and who would have asked questions Daniel wasn't ready to answer. He did not make a decision or form a plan. He simply sat with the feeling, the way he sat with difficult repair problems, letting it show him what it actually was before he decided what to do about it. What it actually was, he concluded sometime around 10:30, was this. He had met someone who interested him more in 3 days than most people managed in months. And the situation was exactly as complicated as she had acknowledged it to be, and probably more complicated than either of them had said out loud. He went to bed. He did not sleep particularly well. The next morning, he was back on his regular schedule. A service call in Westerville at 8, a maintenance check in Dublin at 11. An emergency repair for a restaurant in Short North whose walk-in cooler had decided Thursday evening was an excellent time to develop a refrigerant issue. The day was full in the way regular work days were full, and Daniel moved through it with his usual competence and concentration, and he did not think about Victoria Hale for most of it. Only most. He thought about her when the restaurant manager, a harried woman in her early 40s, said thank you with the particular exhausted relief of someone whose livelihood had just been stabilized, and he thought about what Victoria had said. I think there's something very clear about the way you understand your own life, and whether that clarity was actually a virtue or just a more sophisticated name for a man who had stopped imagining anything beyond the walls of what he'd already built. He was still thinking about that at 4 in the afternoon when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Columbus area code, different from the one he'd stored for Marcus. He answered. Daniel, Victoria's voice. Steady, professional in register, but with something underneath it that wasn't. I hope this isn't a bad time. He was sitting in the van in the Short North restaurant parking lot writing up his service report. It's fine, how's the building? A brief pause. The building is fine. You did excellent work. Another pause, this one slightly longer. I'm actually calling because I've been thinking about what I said yesterday, and I want to be clear that I wasn't trying to create a strange situation. You were professional and good at your work, and She stopped. I'm not usually that impulsive. It didn't seem impulsive, he said. No? It seemed honest. The silence on the line had a particular quality to it, not awkward, but careful, like someone measuring the ground before stepping. I suppose it was, she said. You don't need to walk it back, Daniel said. I'm not holding you to it, but you don't need to apologize for it either. I'm not apologizing. I'm clarifying. What's the clarification? Another pause. He could hear her breathing, could hear the ambient sound of her office, the low hum of electronics, a faint city noise from outside. He imagined the whiteboard behind her desk, Victory O in Lily's large, careful letters. I don't know yet, she admitted. I called before I'd finished deciding what I wanted to say. That's unlike me. That's all right, he said. Is it? People say things before they're ready sometimes. That's usually when they're being true. A short silence. Then, with something that sounded like it might be the beginning of a laugh, you're very calm about things. I work alone a lot. You learn to be calm. I work with 47 people, she said, and I am not always calm. No? No. And this time the laugh was real, brief and genuine and entirely different from the composed professional voice she'd used at the start of the call. I'll let you get back to your day. Okay. Daniel. A beat. Thank you for the work, all of it. You're welcome, Nick, he said. Take care of the building. I will, she said, and then quietly, as though it were an afterthought. And tell Lily that Rubina is still on the whiteboard. He sat in the parking lot for a moment after she hung up, looking at the short North Street through the windshield, the coffee shops and the gallery fronts and the slow Thursday afternoon traffic. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, something he'd nearly forgotten the shape of. He felt the particular, slightly terrifying aliveness of wanting something. Dapam. He told himself he would leave it, and he did leave it, for 4 days, which felt like a personal record given the company. He worked his regular schedule. He picked up Lily. He made dinners and read chapters and braided hair. He had now watched so many tutorial videos on the subject that he had developed genuine opinions about different braiding techniques, a fact that his coworker Dre had found unreasonably entertaining when Daniel had mentioned it in passing. You're out here studying hair, Dre had said, shaking his head. Carter, man. She wanted French braids for picture day, Daniel said, entirely unapologetic. Did you get them right? Third try was good. Dre had laughed so hard he'd had to set down his coffee. Daniel had not found it funny at the time, but found himself smiling about it later, driving home. The completely disproportionate effort of learning a skill simply because your daughter wanted something that required it, and the satisfaction of succeeding, and the fact that Lily had looked at herself in the mirror on picture day and declared that her hair was professional, which was apparently the highest available compliment at Lincoln Elementary. He lived this life. He had built it and he understood it, and there was genuine satisfaction in it. Not the absence of other things, but the actual presence of this thing. This small, clear, real life with its pasta negotiations and chapter books and French braids on picture day. So he left it. 4 days. On the 5th day, he texted Marcus Okafor. The Meridian Avenue job is fully closed out. Report filed. Is there anything else you need from me on that project? Marcus replied within minutes. Nope, all good. Owner said great things about your work, by the way. Any interest in future jobs if she has other properties? She asked specifically. Daniel looked at the text for a long time. I'll keep that open, he typed back, and sent it before he could think about it more, which was the only reason he sent it. The call from Victoria came the following Tuesday. It was 10 in the morning, and he was on a rooftop in Grandview Heights, which was becoming a recurring theme in his life, and his phone rang, and this time her number was saved, so the display said Victoria Hale, and he looked at it for exactly 1 ring before answering. There's a ventilation issue in the second-floor conference room, she said. It was business voice, straight to it. It's been uneven for a week. One side of the room is significantly colder than the other. I had another contractor look at it, but he said it was just a balancing issue and adjusted the dampers, and it's still uneven. Classic misdiagnosis, Daniel said. Damper balancing addresses airflow distribution, not the underlying cause. What's the age of the ductwork on that side of the building? I have no idea. I need to look at the plenum space above that ceiling. When can you come? Thursday morning? Thursday morning, she agreed. And then the briefest deviation from the business register. How's Lily? She's great, he said. Rubina has acquired a companion. A unicorn named Duchess. Victoria laughed. That real laugh, the brief, genuine one. Thursday morning, she said again, and hung up. He stood on the Grandview rooftop in the November morning air and looked at the phone and accepted, with the straightforward practicality he applied to most things, that he had been looking forward to that call for a week. Thursday arrived with the cold front that pushed actual winter into Columbus ahead of schedule, dropping the temperature 15 degrees overnight and coating every surface with a thin, glittering frost that the morning sun was beginning to work on when Daniel arrived on Meridian Avenue. Victoria was at the front door when he pulled up. She had a real coat on this time, charcoal wool, belted, the kind of coat that suggested she was a person who, when she decided to be warm, committed to it. And she was holding 2 coffee cups, the kind with actual lids, the kind you handed to someone who was going to be working. Daniel got out of the van, and she crossed the small distance of the parking lot toward him and held out one of the cups. "You remembered I take it black?" he said. "You've had 3 coffees in this building," she said. "I watched you ignore the sugar twice." He took the cup. "Good memory." "It's the CEO brain," she said. "I retain details whether I mean to or not." They walked inside together. The conference room problem turned out to be more interesting than a simple damper imbalance. When Daniel got into the ceiling space above it, a plenum area that had been inadequately insulated at some point during a previous renovation, he found that one of the supply duct branches had a disconnected elbow joint that had clearly been held in place for some time by friction and hope before finally separating. The disconnected joint was dumping conditioned air directly into the ceiling cavity rather than into the room below, which explained perfectly why half the conference table was comfortable and the other half was a wind tunnel. "The previous contractor adjusted your dampers for a ghost problem," Daniel called down through the open ceiling tile. "Your actual problem is about 8 inches north of where I'm lying." From below, Victoria's voice. "Can you fix it today?" "Already fixing it." A short pause. "Do you always just start before you finish explaining?" "The explaining and the fixing take about the same time." "I'd rather do both together." Another pause, longer. Then, "That is an unreasonably efficient way to work." He reconnected the elbow joint, sealed it, reinforced the connection with 2 draw bands, and replaced the ceiling tile in under 40 minutes. He dropped back down through the access panel and found Victoria seated at the conference room table with her laptop open, working. She had been there the whole time, he realized, working beneath the sound of him working above her, and there was something about that parallel that felt unexpectedly natural. He washed his hands at the small sink in the corridor. "Done," he said, appearing in the doorway. She looked up. "That fast?" "The problem was clean once I found it. Messy diagnostic, simple repair." He leaned against the doorframe. "Run the system for 20 minutes and check both sides of the room. Should be even." She stood and crossed to the thermostat panel on the wall and activated the system. Then she walked to the far side of the room and held her hand up near the diffuser. "There's air coming out," she reported. "There should be." She walked to the other side and held her hand up there too. "Same," she said. She turned and looked at him. "Much better." "Good." They stood on opposite sides of the conference room with the newly balanced air moving between them, and the November frost was melting off the windows in slow rivulets, and the city went about itself on Meridian Avenue below. And Daniel became aware that the professional reason for his presence in this room had been resolved, and neither of them had moved toward the door. "Sit down," Victoria said. It wasn't quite a command, more of a statement, the way she often spoke, declarative without being demanding. "You haven't touched your coffee." He sat. She sat across from him, closed her laptop, and wrapped both hands around her cup. "Tell me something," she said. "About the building?" "No." She considered. "About the rest of it. Your life." She shook her head slightly. "That came out presumptuous. You don't have to—" "It's fine," he said. "What do you want to know?" She thought about this with genuine consideration, which he had come to recognize as characteristic of her. She didn't fill silence with noise. She used silence to think. "Lily's mother," she said finally, carefully. Daniel kept his hands around the coffee cup. "Her name is Renee. We were together for about 2 years. She got pregnant. We tried to make it work for another year after Lily was born, and discovered that we worked better as parents than we did as a couple. We split when Lily was 14 months old. He paused. It wasn't dramatic. It was just, the honest accounting said it wasn't going to work, and we were mature enough to do the math. Do you co-parent? We try. Renee's in Portland now. She moved for work about 2 years ago. Lily stays with her for 6 weeks in the summer. We video call on Sundays. He turned his cup slightly on the table. It's not perfect. There's no version of that situation that's perfect, but Lily knows both her parents love her, and that's the part that actually matters. Victoria nodded. She was listening the way she always listened, with her full attention, not managing the conversation but actually receiving it. What about you? Daniel said. She seemed mildly surprised that the question had come back. What about me? Your version of that story, the personal one. She was quiet for a moment. He waited. I haven't had a version of that story, she said finally. I've had relationships, but nothing that ever got to... I've always been building something, company-wise. There was always a next stage, a next round, a next milestone. People who come into that kind of life tend to either want to own a piece of it or get lost in the shadow of it, and I got tired of both. She looked at her coffee. I'm 30 years old, and I can close a Series C funding round in 6 weeks, and I can't remember the last time I cooked dinner on a Tuesday just because I felt like it. What would you cook? She blinked. What? If you cooked dinner on a Tuesday just because you felt like it, what would you make? She looked at him with the expression he now recognized as the one that meant he'd said something she hadn't expected. Not thrown by it, just recalibrating. Pasta, she said, with olive oil and garlic and a lot of pepper. Good choice, he said. You sound like you have opinions about pasta. I make it 3 times a week. I've developed opinions. Lily's dietary preferences? She guessed. Specific and non-negotiable, he confirmed. She smiled, a real smile, unhurried, reaching her eyes. He had seen it before, on the roof and through the conference room door the day Lily was here. But it still landed with a kind of directness that he was not entirely prepared for, even having experienced it. I like talking to you, she said. Simply. No strategy in it. I like talking to you, he said back. The same way. The conference room held them in its even temperature, the HVAC system doing exactly what it was supposed to do, the repaired joint above the ceiling tile doing its quiet, unglamorous work. After that, the reasons to see each other multiplied in the way that reasons do when two people have decided, without saying it directly, that they're interested in finding them. Victoria discovered that the basement mechanical room had a pressure differential issue. This was true, though it was also a relatively minor issue that a different technician might have logged as a note rather than an immediate service call. Daniel came on a Monday and diagnosed it and fixed it in an hour and stayed for 2. The 2 extra hours were not spent on the building. They were spent at the small table in the ground floor lobby corner with coffee, talking about the kind of things that 2 people talk about when they are in the early days of discovering that the other person is interesting in a specific and growing way. Victoria talked about how she had started her company at 25 with a business partner who had since bought out, and how the company had grown from 4 people in a rented co-working space to 47 people in 3 offices across 2 states. She talked about it with the kind of measured pride that isn't performance, the real pride of someone who has actually done a hard thing and knows precisely what it cost. Daniel talked about what it meant to have a child reshape your entire understanding of what mattered, about the way Lily had rearranged him. He used that word deliberately. Rearranged, not constrained, not limited. And Victoria noticed the distinction. He could see her register it. You don't talk about her like a complication, Victoria said. She's not a complication. She's the clarifying element. What does that mean? It means she makes the important things obvious and the unimportant things irrelevant. You spend less time on the wrong things when you know exactly what you're protecting. Victoria set her coffee cup down and looked at him. I think, she said slowly, that you might be the most grounded person I've ever had coffee with. Low bar if that's true, he said. It's a higher bar than you'd think, she said, with a dryness that carried genuine weight behind it. The second time was lunch, which began as Victoria mentioning a deli 2 blocks north on Meridian that was apparently worth knowing about, and ended with them walking to it together in the November cold and eating Reubens at a small corner table while Victoria described the funding round she was in the middle of closing, and Daniel listened with actual interest because the mechanics of how a company raised capital were, when explained clearly, genuinely fascinating in the same structural way that building systems were fascinating, everything connected to everything else, and the failure of one piece cascading outward. "You're following this," she said, in the middle of explaining a convertible note structure. "Why wouldn't I?" Most people's eyes glaze over in the first 30 seconds. "Most people aren't listening," he said. "What's the cap on the note?" She told him. He nodded. She continued explaining, and he asked one more question that was specific enough that she paused mid-sentence and looked at him. "Where did you learn about note caps?" "I read things," he said. "Also, my cousin tried to start a food truck business a few years back, and we all sat through many presentations." "How did that go?" "He makes very good tacos." The business planning was less strong. She laughed. The real one. And the deli around them continued its lunch rush without caring in the slightest, and Daniel thought that this was what he'd been missing for a long time without having a name for it. Not romance, exactly. Not yet. But this specific thing. A person whose company he actively wanted. A conversation that moved in interesting directions. The feeling of being genuinely engaged by another adult in a way that had nothing to do with obligation. He had been so careful for so long about what he let into his life. Careful in a way that was protective and also, he was beginning to suspect, slightly limiting. He'd told himself that the walls he'd built were for Lily's sake, and partly that was true, but partly they were also for his own. Protection against having wanted something and lost it, which had happened to him once before Lily, and had been bad enough that he'd spent 4 years building the safest possible version of his life. He was beginning to wonder if safe had become another word for something else. What he did not know, what neither of them had spoken about with any directness, was that Victoria's world had its own weather system, and the low-pressure front building in it had a name. Adrian Cole. She mentioned him for the first time on a Wednesday, 2.5 weeks after the conference room repair. They were on the phone. They had begun talking by phone in the evenings occasionally, after Lily was in bed, which had developed without announcement and which Daniel had not examined too closely because examining it would require naming it, and he wasn't there yet. She mentioned Adrian the way you mention something you've been not mentioning until the not mentioning becomes its own kind of presence. "I have a complicated investor situation," she said. She was using the careful voice, the one that was fully composed and fully controlled, and that Daniel had learned to read as meaning the opposite of how it sounded. "One of my earliest backers. He's been important to the company at the beginning, but the relationship has become blurry." "Blurry how?" A pause. "He's made it clear he expects the professional relationship to evolve into something personal. He's been making it clear for about a year." Another pause. "I've been managing it diplomatically. That's the honest way to say I've been avoiding making a decision that will create consequences either way." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "That sounds exhausting," he said. "It is exhausting." She sounded slightly surprised to have said it, as though she'd been carrying it in a sealed container and hadn't intended to open it. "I keep thinking I can manage it without it becoming a confrontation, but I think I've been managing it at the expense of—" She stopped. "At the expense of what?" A longer pause. "At the expense of being honest about what I actually want," she said, "which is a thing I'm apparently only willing to say to you and not to the relevant parties." The honesty of that sat in the phone line between Columbus and wherever she was. Her apartment, probably. She'd mentioned once that she usually took late calls from home. "What do you actually want?" Daniel asked. "I'm working on answering that," she said quietly. He didn't push. He had learned, through years of working on systems that couldn't be forced, that some things had to arrive at their own pace. You could prepare the conditions. You couldn't hurry the resolution. But he felt, sitting on his own couch in his own quiet apartment, the particular shift of a situation becoming more complicated in a way that was not going to resolve itself with patience and waiting alone. He had been here before, in a different way. He knew how it felt when two people circled something true and couldn't quite reach it because the geography between them was made of obligations and histories and other people's expectations. He had navigated that once and come out the other side, a father and a man who lived alone and built careful walls. He did not want to navigate it again from inside those walls. But he also had Lily. He always had Lily. And bringing anything into his life that carried the weight of this much complexity was not a decision he could make for himself alone. Every wall he'd built around her too. These were the thoughts he sat with, quiet and unsolved, the way he sat with the hard problems, letting them show him what they were before deciding what to do. He was at Marcus Okafor's company Christmas lunch on a Saturday in early December when his phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. It was a Saturday, lunch at a restaurant in the short north with a dozen contractors, and the room was loud and good-natured, and Marcus had made a speech that was mostly an extended joke about a ductwork job that had gone wrong in 2021. And Daniel had been laughing and present and genuinely relaxed in the way you were relaxed around people you'd known and worked alongside for years. The text said, "This is Adrian Cole. I believe we may have a mutual acquaintance. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience." Daniel looked at the text for a long time. His name, Adrian Cole, had his personal cell number and had used it. He did not reply. He turned his phone over on the table and returned to the lunch, and he was still laughing and present for the rest of it because he was not a man who let things show before he decided how to respond to them. But on the drive home, his mind was very quiet, in the specific way it was quiet when it was actually working very hard. How Adrian Cole had gotten his number was answerable. It was on the contracted service documents for the Meridian Avenue job. That was public enough within the appropriate channels. The question was not how. The question was why. He picked up Lily from his sister-in-law's place where she'd been for the afternoon, and she climbed into the truck and reported that she had learned to do a cartwheel and demonstrated by doing one across the driveway, which was not entirely a cartwheel but contained the structural elements of one and was achieved with complete commitment, which he recognized as the most important part. "That's a cartwheel," he said. "Almost," she admitted. "The ending needs work." "The ending always needs work," he said. He buckled her in and drove home and helped her practice cartwheels in the small living room for 40 minutes. The furniture pushed against the walls to create a corridor of just enough space, and by the end she had landed one clean one and declared the evening a success and eaten her dinner and fallen asleep almost instantly. Daniel sat on the couch in the rearranged living room, furniture still pushed aside, the corridor of Lily's cartwheel practice still open in the middle of the room, and looked at Adrian Cole's text. He had not replied. He was still deciding if he was going to, because a man who sought out a contractor to send a message was a man who felt that his interests were being threatened by that contractor. And a man who felt his interests threatened was, in Daniel's experience, a man who had identified the wrong problem. He was not a problem to be managed. He was a man who fixed things when they were broken and left them alone when they were sound. And he had been doing exactly that on Meridian Avenue. And what had happened there was between him and Victoria and no one else's territory to map. He put the phone in his pocket. He moved the furniture back where it belonged. He went to bed. And he decided, in the particular clarity that came when he stopped managing a feeling and simply let it be what it was, that he was not going to allow someone else's agenda to make his decisions for him. He was also not going to pretend any longer that what was happening between him and Victoria Hale was only about the building on Meridian Avenue. It hadn't been about the building for a while. He thought about telling her that. He was still thinking about it when he fell asleep. And in the morning, when he made coffee and watched the early December street from the kitchen window, the thought was still there, clearer and quieter than it had been the night before, the way the clearest things always were. He did not reply to Adrian Cole's text. Not that day, not the next. He let it sit in his phone the way you let a bad joint sit before you decide whether to reinforce it or tear it out entirely, studying it, taking its measure, refusing to act before he understood what he was actually dealing with. On Monday, he called Victoria. Not the evening call, the kind that had become their habit in the quiet hours after Lily was asleep. He called at 9 in the morning, working hours, her business line. She answered on the second ring. "I got a text from Adrian Cole on Saturday," Daniel said. No preamble. He had decided that directness was the only approach that wouldn't insult either of them. "He has my personal cell number. He said he wants to talk." The silence on the other end was brief but specific. the silence of a person absorbing information they had feared was coming. "What exactly did he say?" Victoria asked. Her voice had the particular controlled quality that he now recognized as her managing something she felt strongly about. "He said he believed we had a mutual acquaintance. He wanted to speak at my earliest convenience." Another silence. "I'm sorry," she said. "That number is on the service contract. He has access to the vendor files. He's on the company board." A pause that had frustration in it. "That's not something he should have done." "No," Daniel agreed. "It isn't." "Did you respond?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first." A beat. "Why?" "Because whatever that text is, it's not really about me. And before I decide how to handle it, I thought you should know it happened." The line was quiet for a moment. Through it, he could hear her breathe, could hear the low ambient sound of her office, and he thought about all the days he had spent in that building and how well he now knew the specific quality of its silences. "He's been escalating," she said finally. The word was careful and accurate. "He's made comments in the last few weeks about the building renovations, about contractors who spend a lot of time on site." She paused. "He's a man who is accustomed to the landscape arranging itself according to his preferences." "And the landscape isn't arranging itself," Daniel said. "No," she said. "It isn't." He looked out the van window at the parking lot of the Grandview service call he hadn't started yet. A woman was walking a dog along the sidewalk, the dog investigating every crack in the pavement with scientific thoroughness. "I'm going to ignore it," he said. "The text, it doesn't require a response." "You don't have to manage this on my behalf." "I'm not managing it on your behalf," he said. "I'm managing it because I don't engage with other people's attempts to reframe a situation I understand perfectly well." He paused. "He wants me to feel like an intruder in someone else's story." "I don't." Another silence, this one different, softer. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah." "Nothing." She seemed to reconsider whatever she'd been about to say. "Thank you for calling me." "Of course," he said. He went inside to do his service call, and he was steady and precise and thorough, the way he always was, and he did not think about Adrian Cole again for the rest of the workday. But he thought about Victoria, about the quality of that silence after he'd said, "I don't," about the specific sound of a person hearing something they needed to hear and not yet knowing what to do with it. The week that followed had the slightly suspended quality of weather before a change, everything moving normally, but with an atmospheric pressure that told you normal was temporary. He and Victoria spoke twice, once by phone and once at the building when she called him back in for what was legitimately a minor system check on the newly repaired unit. She wanted verification that it was holding through the cold snap that had settled over Columbus in the second week of December. He came on a Thursday afternoon, checked the unit, confirmed it was performing well, and they had coffee in the conference room that now had even temperature distribution throughout. She seemed slightly different, not distant. If anything, she was more present, more directly engaged. But there was something underneath the engagement that hadn't been there before, a kind of careful watchfulness, like someone who knows a season is changing and is deciding what to bring with them and what to leave behind. "He called me on Tuesday," she said, without transition, in the middle of a conversation about a completely different topic. Daniel didn't have to ask who. "What did he say?" "He wanted to have dinner Friday. He framed it as a business dinner. He does that. Frames things in business language when the actual content is personal." She turned her coffee cup slowly on the table. "I said I had a prior commitment." "Did you?" She looked at him with a slight dry lift of her eyebrow. "I do now," she said. He studied her face for a moment. "What does your board look like? How much of your company's funding structure is tied to him?" She sat back slightly. "You want to talk business architecture?" "I want to understand the actual shape of the problem," he said. "You said the relationship was complicated professionally. I want to understand what complicated means in concrete terms." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her deciding something. Not about whether to trust him, he thought, but about whether she was ready to say the thing out loud that she'd been carrying internally, which was a different kind of decision. "He was in the first round," she said. 18% equity stake. He sat on the board of directors for 3 years but stepped back from the active board seat 18 months ago. That was his choice, not mine. She paused. The stake still exists, but his operational leverage is much lower than he behaves as though it is. He projects authority he no longer technically holds. So the professional entanglement is real, but manageable, Daniel said. It's the personal entanglement that's actually the complication. Yes, simply. The professional piece I know how to handle. The personal piece I've been avoiding handling because I kept thinking it would resolve itself without a confrontation, and it won't. She met his eyes. I know it won't. No, he said quietly. It won't. She looked at him steadily. I'm going to have the conversation with him, she said. I've been putting it off for a year. I'm going to stop doing that. Okay. I wanted you to know that, she said. Not because you asked, because I want you to know it. The conference room was warm and even. The December afternoon was pressing gray against the windows. Daniel looked at the woman across the table from him. The particular combination of strength and honesty in her face. The way she looked directly at things she was afraid of rather than looking away. And he felt the thing he had not been naming become, quietly and without announcement, impossible to keep unnamed. I want to take you to dinner, he said. Not in relation to any of this. Before any of this is resolved, I want to take you to dinner because I'd like to sit across a table from you in a context that isn't a building repair. Victoria was very still. A date, she said. A date, he confirmed. A silence that lasted exactly the right amount of time. Yes, she said. Nah. He did not tell anyone except Marcus, and only Marcus, because Marcus had made the introduction and would have been genuinely wounded to find out secondhand. Marcus's response was a lengthy pause, followed by, Carter, I have known you for 8 years, and I did not see this coming. I didn't either, Daniel said. Is it a good idea? I don't know yet. It feels like a true idea. Another pause. Those are different things, man. I know, Daniel said. I'm not confused about which one it is. Marcus had laughed and wished him luck, and that was the end of the analysis. He arranged for Mrs. Garza's daughter, a 24-year-old named Sophia, who Lily adored and who charged $15 an hour and was worth every cent, to watch Lily on Saturday evening. He told Lily he was having dinner with a friend. And Lily asked which friend, and he said the lady from the building downtown, the one with the whiteboard, and Lily's expression went through several stages of processing before arriving at, tell her Duchess needs a saddle. I'll relay that, Daniel said. He put on the best clothes he owned, dark slacks, a charcoal dress shirt, the wool jacket his sister had bought him 2 Christmases ago that he had worn exactly twice. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, practicing the ordinary, unremarkable act of going on a date, which felt extraordinary in a way he hadn't anticipated and chose not to overthink. He picked up Victoria at 7. She lived in a building in the short north. A newer building, glass and steel, the kind that came with a lobby that required a code. He texted when he arrived, and she came down and walked through the lobby toward him across 40 feet of polished concrete, and she was wearing a dark green dress and her hair was down, which he had not seen before, and he was aware of a particular moment that happens sometimes when a person steps outside the context in which you know them and you see them differently, not as a stranger, but as a completion of something you had only partially understood. You drove, she said, gesturing at the truck. I did, he said. I was going to offer to take a car service. I drive people I care about, he said simply. She looked at him across the short distance between the truck and the lobby entrance, and something in her expression changed. Something that had been held in reserve became, briefly, visible. Okay, she said. He held the door of the truck. She got in. He took her to a place in German Village that he had been to once before with Marcus, a restaurant that did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. A narrow room with brick walls and close tables, and a menu written on a chalkboard, and food that was serious and unpretentious and very good. It was not the kind of restaurant a person took someone to impress them. It was the kind you took someone to when you wanted them to understand who you actually were. She looked around the room when they walked in and said, I've never been here. I thought you probably hadn't. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, he said. The short north has 800 places like the one you'd normally end up. This one takes about 5 minutes of actually looking. She looked at the chalkboard. They have a brisket. They have a very good brisket. She ordered the brisket. He ordered the chicken. They ordered a bottle of wine that the server recommended, and which turned out to be exactly right, and they talked. They talked for 3 hours. It was the longest uninterrupted conversation Daniel had had with an adult human being in recent memory, and it moved through territory that neither of them had covered in the building or on the phone. Childhood, formative things, the specific textures of how each of them had become the person they were now. Victoria talked about growing up in Cincinnati with a mother who was a nurse and a father who ran a dry cleaning business. About the particular pressure of being the child of people who worked hard and wanted more for you, about teaching herself to code at 14 because it felt like a language she'd been waiting to find. Daniel talked about his father, the man who had been right about the HVAC work and wrong about most other things. A man who had been absent in the way that some men were absent while being technically present, providing without engaging. About how that absence had made Daniel almost aggressively committed to presence, to being in the room in the way that mattered, which Lily had made concrete and necessary. You became the opposite of what you grew up with, Victoria said. I tried to, he said. I don't know if I've always managed it. You braid your daughter's hair for picture day, she said. You're managing it. He looked at her across the close table. You remembered that. I told you, she said. I retain details. The restaurant moved around them with its quiet industry, the other tables occupying their own private worlds, the brick walls holding the warmth of the room against the December cold outside. And Daniel thought that this was the best he had felt in an evening in a very long time. Not the high-intensity happiness of a particular moment, but the deeper, steadier satisfaction of being exactly where he was with exactly this person. Can I ask you something? He said. You've been asking me things all evening. This one is different. She tilted her head slightly, waiting. What do you actually want? He said. Not from the company, not from the funding round, not from the next milestone. What does Victoria Hale want from the part of her life that isn't her job? She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the wine in her glass. I want to cook pasta on a Tuesday, she said. I want to read a book that has nothing to do with technology or business. I want to take a trip somewhere and not spend most of it on calls. She paused. I want to be with someone who sees me when they look at me. Not my valuation, not my board seat. Me. What does that look like when someone does it right? She looked up from the wine glass and directly at him. Like this, she said. They walked through the German village streets afterward, the cold air clean and sharp, their breath visible in the lamplight, the old brick houses with their December lights pressing warm gold into the darkness. They walked without a destination, close but not touching, which was its own kind of intimacy. The particular attention of two people aware of the space between them. He drove her home at 11:15. She turned toward him when he pulled up to her building, and they were in that specific geography of a first evening ending. Close, private, the city quiet around the truck, neither of them in any hurry. Thank you, she said, for this. Thank you for coming. She smiled, the real one, unhurried. Tell Lily that Rubina and Duchess are important to me. She'll be very pleased to hear that. A beat. She looked at him with a directness that was simply and completely her. I'd like to do this again, she said. So would I, he said. She got out, walked toward her building, turned once at the lobby door and looked back, and he was still there, which she seemed to have expected, and which was, he thought, already the beginning of a new kind of knowing. He drove home in the December dark and felt the specific, careful happiness of someone who has done something brave and found that the ground held. 10 days later, Adrian Cole arrived. Daniel was finishing a mid-afternoon repair on the building's exterior, a small but important resealing job on a parapet flashing section that he'd noticed on a previous visit showing early signs of winter deterioration, when the black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot. He was on a ladder, working, and he noted the car with the professional periphery of attention he applied to everything around him on a job site. The man who stepped out matched no particular expectation. He was perhaps 50, well-preserved in the way of men who had always had money for the things that preserved a person. Good suits, the right barbers, the right gyms. He was carrying white roses, the long-stemmed kind, wrapped in cellophane, which struck Daniel as a choice that was more about statement than sentiment. He moved with the assured deliberateness of someone who had arranged his life to deliver maximum impact from every entrance. Daniel kept working. Adrian looked up. His gaze found Daniel on the ladder with the speed of a man accustomed to categorizing environments instantly, filing each element into columns: relevant, irrelevant, threat, asset. Daniel watched him file it. Victoria appeared at the building entrance. She had been expecting him. Daniel could tell from the particular composure she was wearing, the professional armor she put on for difficult meetings. She greeted Adrian with a handshake that was warm in the surface way and precise in the way underneath. Adrian offered the roses. She took them with a brief thank you. They went inside. Daniel descended the ladder 20 minutes later to retrieve materials from his staging area. He passed through the lobby and could hear voices from the second floor, Adrian's first, carrying the resonance of a man used to filling rooms, and Victoria's responding, lower, measured. He took what he needed and went back to work. He was coming down the ladder for the final time, repair complete, packing his tools with his usual methodical care, when he heard the front door open. Victoria came out first, then Adrian. They stood in the small parking lot entrance, and Daniel was 10 feet away with his tool bag and his clipboard, and the moment had the particular awkward geometry of a situation that had been pretending not to be what it was. Adrian looked at Daniel, not with the casual acknowledgement of someone noting a contractor finishing work, with a very specific, very deliberate appraisal. "Is this the contractor you've been using?" he said to Victoria. He said it as though Daniel weren't standing there, as though the question were about a piece of equipment. Victoria's expression was entirely still. "Daniel Carter. He manages the building systems." Adrian extended a hand toward Daniel, not an offered handshake. It was closer to an examination, the kind of gesture that calculated power in its angle and timing. Daniel shook it, firm, brief, neutral. "Good work on the roof," Adrian said. The tone managed to be both a compliment and a dismissal simultaneously. "The building's in good shape," Daniel said. Adrian's gaze moved between them. Something in his face, not anger yet, something that preceded anger, the calculus of it, assessed the space between Daniel and Victoria, the specific, unarchitected ease of two people who knew each other in a way that couldn't be professionally explained. "Victoria." Adrian turned to her. "I was hoping we could have that dinner conversation tonight. There are some board items I'd like to address while I'm in Columbus." "I have plans tonight," Victoria said. It was the second time she had said that to him. Daniel could hear in her voice that she knew it was the second time and that Adrian knew it too. "Tomorrow then," Adrian said. The pleasant professional surface stretched tight over something that had decided it was done being pleasant. "I'll check my calendar and have Lena reach out," Victoria said. The polite efficiency of it was its own kind of answer. Adrian looked at Daniel one more time. "Mr. Carter," he said. "Mr. Cole," Daniel said. And Adrian got into the Mercedes and the parking lot became significantly quieter. Victoria waited until the car had turned out of the lot onto Meridian before she allowed her composure to show the small fracture lines in it. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't need to apologize for him," Daniel said. "I know." She looked at the roses in her hand, which she was holding slightly away from her body, which told its own story. He arranged this visit specifically to, I don't know exactly what he wanted, to make the geography clear to himself, I think, to see what was here. What did he see? She looked at Daniel. "What's here?" she said. That night, Daniel's phone rang at 9:47. Not Victoria, not Marcus. Adrian Cole. Daniel sat with the ringing phone for 3 beats and then answered. "Mr. Carter." The same measured, resonant voice from the parking lot, but the pleasant surface was gone. What was underneath it was not hostile, exactly. It was the specific temperature of a man who had decided to be honest about what he wanted and believed that honesty to be a form of power. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "What can I do for you, Mr. Cole?" A pause. "I think you know why I'm calling." "Tell me anyway." "I've known Victoria Hale for 6 years," Adrian said. "I was her first serious investor when her company was 4 people in a co-working space and the deal sheet said she had a 15% chance of making it to Series A. I took that risk. She made it to Series A and B and C. The company is now worth considerably more than the check I wrote. Another pause. We have a significant shared history. I hear that, Daniel said. I want you to understand something, and I want to say it directly because I think you're the kind of man who respects directness. Adrian's voice had the particular control of a man managing something he didn't fully have control over. Victoria is at a critical moment in her company's trajectory. A distraction of this kind, at this level, is not in her interest. Whatever you may think is developing here, the practical reality is that her world and yours don't occupy the same space. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it as a man who understands her circumstances better than you do. Daniel was quiet. Outside his apartment window, the December Columbus night was clear and cold, street lamps throwing hard yellow circles on the pavement. Mr. Cole, he said finally, I'm going to be direct with you too. What you're doing right now isn't about Victoria's company trajectory, and it isn't really about me. It's about the fact that you've decided you're entitled to something that hasn't been offered to you, and you're looking for a lever to make the situation arrange itself the way you want it. He paused. I'm not a lever. The silence on Adrian's end had a different quality now, recalibrating. You're a contractor who works on buildings, Adrian said. The pleasantness was gone entirely. She's a CEO of a billion-dollar company. Whatever story you're telling yourself about what this is, it isn't that. I'm not telling myself a story, Daniel said. I'm just a man who knows what he is. I don't spend much time worrying about what other people think that's worth. That's a very confident position for someone in your situation. My situation is my daughter and my work and my life, Daniel said. It's a pretty solid situation. I'm not ashamed of it, and I'm not apologizing for it, not to you or to anyone. The line was quiet. You should think carefully, Adrian said. The last card he had, laid without elegance. About what, specifically? But Adrian had already hung up. Daniel sat for a moment in the quiet apartment, the weight of the call settling through him, not with anger, but with a particular cold clarity. He had known men like Adrian Cole, not this wealthy, not this polished, but the same architecture underneath. Men who believed that enough money and enough certainty created a right to the landscape they wanted. Men who confused having resources with having permission. He was not going to be moved by that. But he also knew that this had crossed a line, not because Daniel was afraid of Adrian's influence over his own life, but because Adrian had now contacted him directly twice, and that meant he was willing to escalate. And escalation always had consequences, and the consequences would land on Victoria before they landed anywhere else. He called her. She answered on the first ring. He called you, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. What did he say? Daniel relayed the substance of it, directly and without dramatization. He heard her breathing change on the other end. Not fear, not distress, but the particular quality of someone who has been patient with a situation for a long time and has finally reached the end of their patience. I'm done managing this, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very final. Okay, he said. I mean, I am done. Not I need another week done. Not I need to find the right moment done. She paused. He doesn't have enough leverage to actually damage the company if the conversation is managed correctly. I've known that for 6 months. I've been using the business complexity as a reason not to have the personal conversation, and that has been cowardly of me. It hasn't been cowardly, Daniel said. It's been careful. Careful for too long becomes a different thing, she said. He couldn't argue with that. Are you all right? He asked. A pause. Yes. And then honestly, I'm angry that he called you, that he put that conversation on you. That wasn't his right, and I'm angry about it. Don't be angry on my behalf, Daniel said. I handled it. I know you handled it, she said. That's not the point. The point is that he treated you as... She stopped. Started again. He looked at you and calculated what you were worth in his framework, and he thought the calculation would end the question. And that tells me everything I need to know about the gap between what he understands and what is actually real. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You don't have to do anything on a timeline that's mine, he said. Whatever you decide with him, decide it for your own reasons. My own reasons are sufficient, she said, and there was a certainty in it that hadn't been there before. The certainty of a decision fully made, no longer negotiated or postponed. They stayed on the phone a while longer, not about Adrian, just talking, the way they had been talking in the evenings. And Daniel sat in his quiet apartment and listened to her voice and felt the specific weight of a situation getting simpler even as its immediate complexity grew. 3 days later, Victoria met with Adrian Cole. She told Daniel afterward on the phone in the same quiet final voice. I told him that whatever he believed existed between us personally had never been mutual, and I should have said that a year ago instead of managing around it. I told him his equity position remained unchanged, and I had no intention of mishandling the professional relationship. And I told him that his decision to contact my contractor directly was inappropriate and should not happen again. How did he respond? He was controlled, she said. Cold. He said he understood. He said we'd speak through legal counsel going forward regarding board matters. She paused. He'll be fine. His ego is wounded, but his financial interests are intact, and ultimately that's what matters most to him. He'll redirect. And you? A silence. I feel like I've put down something I've been carrying for a long time, she said. It's strange. I expected it to feel more complicated. The complicated part was the anticipation, he said. The thing itself was probably always going to be cleaner than you feared. Yes, she said, and then, you were right about that. I've been right about a few things lately, he said. Don't let it go to your head. She laughed. The real one, warm and unguarded, and it filled the phone line the same way it had filled his chest the first time he heard it, back in a second-floor corridor when his daughter had been laughing behind a closed office door. Outside his window, the December night was going its usual way, cold and clear and indifferent to the particular human drama that had just resolved itself a few miles away. In the morning, there would be a service call in Worthington and Lily's school winter program in the afternoon. The one she had told him approximately 47 times was important because she had a solo speaking part which she was not nervous about at all, not even a little bit, and which she had been rehearsing at dinner every evening for 2 weeks. I want to meet Lily properly, Victoria said, quietly. Not a demand, not even quite a request. More like someone finally allowing themselves to say the thing they'd been thinking. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about the walls he'd built, about the careful architecture of a life constructed for protection, about the difference between maintaining a perimeter and simply being afraid. Her school program is Thursday, he said. She has a speaking part. She's not nervous about it at all. A pause. Is that an invitation? If you want it to be. The silence that followed had the particular quality he had come to recognize as Victoria making a real decision, not a managed one. I'll be there, she said. He looked at the water stain on his ceiling, the brown oval above his bed, the one he kept meaning to fix, the one that had been there through every morning of the last year and a half. He had looked at it so many times it had become nearly invisible, the way familiar things became invisible when you stopped noticing them. He noticed it now. I'll get to that this weekend, he thought, and this time he thought he might actually mean it. Thursday came the way important days often do. Without announcing itself, ordinary in its mechanics, the alarm at 4:47, the coffee, the kitchen window and the winter street below, all of it exactly the same as every other morning, which was itself a kind of reassurance. The world didn't recalibrate for significant events. It just continued, and you moved through it carrying whatever the day held. Lily was awake before Daniel for the first time in recent memory. He came out of the bedroom at 5:15 to find her already sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas. Her script, 4 lines typed and printed by her teacher on a half sheet of paper, spread flat before her, her small index finger moving under each word as she read it silently. She didn't look up when he came in. Her concentration was total. He made coffee without speaking, measured his 2.5 scoops, pressed the button, leaned against the counter and watched her read. After a minute, she looked up. I'm not nervous, she said. I know, he said. Some kids in my class are nervous. She considered this with the evaluative fairness of a 6-year-old who had decided that nervousness was understandable in others, even if personally unnecessary. Caleb is nervous because he has 3 lines, and he always forgets the middle one. What's the middle one? She told him. It was about winter being a season of quiet things growing. That's a good line, he said. It's better than mine, she admitted with the same fairness. Mine is about snowflakes, but Ms. Kaplan said I have good projection. You've always had good projection, he said. She seemed satisfied. She returned to her script. He made her breakfast. Oatmeal, with a precise amount of brown sugar, no more, no less. And she ate while continuing to read, and the morning moved forward with the particular orderly comfort of a well-established routine, and Daniel moved through it carrying, underneath the routine, something that hummed with a quiet, specific aliveness. At 7:15, while he was packing Lily's bag, she said, without looking up from the script she was still holding, "Is Victoria coming tonight?" He paused. He had told her last night, matter-of-factly, the way he tried to tell her things that were real, without drama, without preemptive explanation, just the fact plainly offered. "Victoria is going to come to your program tonight, if that's okay with you." And Lily had said okay in the distracted way of someone whose mind was on a speaking part. He had taken that as sufficient consent. Now, apparently, it had been processing. "Yes," he said. "She's coming." Lily turned the script over in her hands. "Will she sit with you?" "If you want her to." A pause. "Does she know about Caleb forgetting the middle line?" "I'll brief her," he said. Lily appeared to find this adequate. She put the script in her backpack with the careful respect of an important document. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." Teat. The school program was at 6:30. Daniel picked Lily up from aftercare at 4, took her home, fed her an early dinner of the pasta with the right amount of garlic, and helped her into the dress she had selected the previous weekend with the focused deliberation of a person who understood that wardrobe choices communicated character. It was navy blue with the white collar, and she had asked Daniel to do her hair in the French braid, which he did on the third attempt. The first two being assessed by Lily as structurally sound but aesthetically insufficient. "The third one is the best," she confirmed, examining herself in the bathroom mirror. "I've been saying that for months," he said. She giggled, the sudden unguarded giggle that was his single favorite sound in the world, and hopped down from the step stool. He texted Victoria at 5:45. "Program starts at 6:30. Lincoln Elementary, Hartwell, and Broad. Parking lot on the east side." She replied within 2 minutes. "I'll be there at 6:15. Should I bring anything?" He thought about it. "Lily asked if you knew about Caleb forgetting the middle line. I said I'd brief you." A pause. Then, "Consider me briefed." "Who's Caleb?" "The kid with 3 lines. The middle one is about quiet things growing." "Got it. I'll be ready to be supportive if there's an incident." He put the phone in his pocket and told Lily it was time to go. Gosu. Lincoln Elementary's gymnasium had been transformed for the occasion, with the particular effort of a school that took its seasonal programs seriously. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling on fishing line, a painted backdrop of a winter forest covered the stage, and folding chairs had been arranged in rows with the slight irregularity that indicated volunteer setup. The room smelled of floor cleaner and hot chocolate from the table set up near the entrance, where a PTA parent was ladling from a large urn with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this many times. Daniel dropped Lily at the backstage area, a repurposed storage room where 23 children in various states of formal attire were vibrating with the particular energy of imminent performance, and went to find seats. Victoria was already there. She was standing near the entrance in a dark wool coat, holding 2 programs that she must have picked up from the table near the door, looking around the gymnasium with the slightly careful expression of a person entering a social context they know well in theory and less well in practice. She spotted Daniel when he was still 20 feet away, and something in her expression shifted into something simpler. "You found it," he said. "You gave me very good directions." She handed him one of the programs. "I brought this." She produced from her coat pocket a small wrapped item. A 6-pack of Lily's preferred brand of colored markers, the fine-tip kind she'd used to write Victoria on the whiteboard. "Is that appropriate? I didn't know the protocol for school programs." "There's no protocol," he said. "She'll be very happy." But they found seats in the 4th row, center, which Daniel had identified on previous programs as the optimal location. Close enough to see clearly, far enough back that the children couldn't be distracted by parental proximity. He had attended 4 of these programs. He had developed opinions about seating strategy. He told Victoria this. She listened with the specific attentiveness she gave everything, and then said, "You've been to 4 of these?" She's had a program every December and one in spring since she started school. What were the other programs? First one was a general music thing. She played a triangle. Second was a spring recitation. She did a poem about frogs that she had selected herself on the basis that it rhymed well. Third was last year's winter program. She was a snowflake. He paused. Non-speaking snowflake. She was philosophical about it. Victoria looked at him with the expression that meant she was genuinely charmed but managing it with dignity. You remember all of these? They're the most important events in my calendar. She was quiet for a moment. Around them, the gymnasium was filling, parents settling, younger siblings being managed, someone's toddler making a spirited attempt to eat a program, and the noise level was rising to the particular warm pitch of a community gathering. Tell me about the frog's poem, she said. He told her. She listened all the way through, which took about 3 minutes because the poem had been 8 stanzas and Lily had performed it with interpretive emphasis on every rhyming word. And Victoria laughed twice at the right places, and once at a place Daniel hadn't anticipated. And it was such a genuinely good laugh, so unguarded and real, that the couple sitting in the row ahead of them turned around briefly to see what was funny. The lights dimmed. The program began. He watched Victoria watching the stage, and he watched his daughter when she came out. Third from the left, navy dress, French braid holding, chin lifted with the focused calm of someone who had prepared for this moment and was ready to deliver. And the feeling in his chest as both things happened simultaneously was not complicated. It was simply and completely real. Lily's 4 lines were delivered with exactly the projection miss. Kaplan had commended clear and steady, her eyes moving across the audience with the trained performance instinct of a child who had been listening to Daniel narrate their life with careful attention for 6 years. She did not falter. She did not rush. She said the last line about snowflakes being the winter's way of saying something too delicate for words, with a slight pause before delicate that Daniel was certain was improvised in the moment, and was, objectively, the correct choice. Caleb forgot the middle line. There was a brief silence on the stage. Then, from somewhere in the third position, Lily's voice, very quietly but absolutely audibly, said the first 3 words of the middle line. Just the first 3. Just enough. Caleb found his footing and completed it, and the program moved on. Victoria leaned close to Daniel's ear. Did she just— Yes, he said quietly. That was extraordinary. She's been doing things like that her whole life, he said. Victoria sat back and looked at the stage and said nothing else, but he felt the quality of her silence change into something that was paying a particular kind of attention. Afterward, in the gymnasium's warm post-program chaos of parents finding children and children finding cookies, Lily located Daniel through the crowd with the homing accuracy she had always possessed and arrived at his side still carrying the focused dignity of recent performance. She looked at Victoria. Victoria crouched, not quickly, not performatively, but the natural adjustment of a tall person choosing to be at eye level with someone important. Your lines were excellent, she said, particularly the last one. I changed the pause before delicate, Lily said. I noticed. It was the right choice. Lily examined her with the particular thoroughness she applied to things she was deciding about. Did you know about the middle line? Dad said he briefed you. He did. And you handled it perfectly. Caleb was relieved, Lily said. She said it with generous, non-judgmental accuracy. Then she looked at the wrapped markers Victoria was holding out toward her, and her expression completed its assessment of the situation. Are those for me? They're fine tips, Victoria said, in case Rubina and Duchess need additional detail work. Lily took the markers with both hands, the way she took things that mattered. She looked up at Victoria. Do you want to come get hot chocolate with us? She asked. They have the kind with the little marshmallows. Daniel watched Victoria take exactly 1 breath before answering, not hesitating, processing, absorbing the full weight of what she was being offered by a 6-year-old in a navy dress who had just performed with professional composure and then quietly saved a classmate's moment without seeking any credit for it. I would like that very much, Victoria said. They stood in line at the hot chocolate table, the 3 of them, and Lily narrated the evening's backstage preparations and the particular details she reserved for events she had found genuinely significant, and Daniel held his cup and listened to his daughter talk to this woman, and the gymnasium noise moved around them warm and alive, and he was aware of the specific moment they were in with the clarity of someone who had learned to pay attention. He drove Victoria to her building at 8:45, Lily asleep in the back seat before they'd crossed two intersections, her head against the window, the markers clutched against her chest like a thing she intended to wake up still holding. The city went by in its winter dark, the Christmas lights on the storefronts throwing colored patterns across the wet pavement. "Thank you for inviting me," Victoria said. "Thank you for coming." She looked at Lily in the back seat. She whispered those three words so that only Caleb could hear them, she said. She wasn't trying to be seen doing it. She just did it. "That's how she is," Daniel said. "She doesn't do good things to get credit for them. She just does them because they need doing." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She gets that from someone." He didn't answer that, but he felt it. At her building, he parked, and she turned toward him, and they were in the same geography as the German village night, the quiet of the truck, the city around them, the closeness of two people who had moved past the careful initial distance. "Daniel." She said it with the particular quality of the beginning of something that had been thought about for a while. "Yeah. I want to say something, and I want to say it clearly so there's no ambiguity about what I mean." She looked at him directly. "I have been in rooms with a lot of people. I have sat across tables from people with extraordinary abilities, brilliant engineers, creative founders, people who can hold a boardroom or a stage or an investor presentation, and I have been impressed by those things." She paused. "What you do doesn't look like any of that. Your life doesn't look like any of those lives, and I am more impressed by you than by any of them." He was quiet. "I'm not saying that to flatter you," she said. "I'm saying it because I think you've spent some portion of your life receiving a version of the opposite message, and I want to be clear about what I actually see when I look at your life." "Victoria, you raised a child who whispers the first three words of a poem to help a nervous classmate without asking for anything back," she said. "That didn't come from nowhere. That came from you." She held his gaze. "I want you to know that I see that." The December street was very still outside the truck. Somewhere down the block, a string of lights on a storefront blinked their slow pattern. He looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had said an honest thing on an October afternoon with no expectation attached, and who had said it again now with the same quality of simple, clean truth. "I see you too," he said. "The whole of you, not the valuation." She breathed in slowly. "I know," she said. "That's why I said it." They sat in the truck for another 20 minutes, Lily sleeping in the back seat, talking about nothing consequential. A movie Victoria had seen on a recent flight that she had strong opinions about, a diner near Lily's school that Daniel had discovered made a transcendent apple pie. Small things. The specific, unimportant texture of two people becoming familiar with each other's ordinary world. And when she finally got out and walked to her building and turned at the lobby door, he stayed until she was inside, because he always stayed. He drove home in the December dark with his sleeping daughter and the particular grounded happiness of a man who was exactly where he needed to be. The storm arrived on a Thursday night in the second week of January. Columbus had been tracking it for 2 days. The weather services upgrading their warnings progressively from advisory to watch to warning as the system moved up from the south carrying more moisture than January usually held, the kind of storm that turned the city strange for 12 to 18 hours before moving on. By Thursday afternoon, the sky had that specific flat white color that meant business, and the temperature was dropping with the purposeful speed of a system that had decided. Daniel picked up Lily early from school, per the automated district message, and they spent the afternoon indoors. Lily working on a new addition to the Rubina and Duchess saga that now occupied an entire sketchbook, Daniel doing the small home repairs that workday weeks never left room for. He replaced the bathroom faucet handle that had been loose for 3 months. He fixed the cabinet hinge in the kitchen. He patched the area around the bathroom window that had been showing a hairline draft. At 7 in the evening, he stood in the hallway and looked up at the water stain on the bedroom ceiling, the brown oval that had been there since March, that he looked at every morning, that had become so familiar as to be nearly invisible. He went and got the spackle and the paint roller and the drop cloth. He was halfway through the ceiling patch when the storm arrived in earnest. The windows flexed slightly with the first serious gusts. The rain, which had been moderate since 5 o'clock, became suddenly and committed heavy. the kind that made the street below invisible. He could hear it on the roof above him, the flat drone of serious precipitation. Lily appeared in the bedroom doorway. "It's very loud," she reported. "It is," he said. He was on the step stool, roller in hand, examining the patch. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Gerald is a little scared." Gerald was the one-eyed stuffed elephant. "But I told him we were safe." "We're very safe," Daniel said. "This building's been here since 1987. It's weathered worse." She seemed satisfied. She retreated to her room. He continued the ceiling. At 8:15 his phone rang. "Victoria." "The building lost power," she said. There was something controlled in her voice that was managing something underneath it. "The server room is on battery backup, but we have 2 production systems running, and the backup will last maybe 3 hours, and the power company is saying restoration might be 4 to 6 given the outages across the grid." She paused. "The emergency generator isn't starting. Building management can't reach their primary technician." He already knew where this was going. "What's the generator?" "I have no idea. I'm looking at it. It's in the basement. It's gray and large, and there's a panel on the front." "Read me what it says on the panel." She read him the model number. He knew it. A commercial standby unit, 10 years old based on the building's age, the kind that was completely reliable when properly maintained and completely truculent when it wasn't. "Does it have a manual start option? There should be a switch on the right side of the panel, below the main breaker row." "Yes, I tried it." "Did it turn over?" "It clicked once and nothing." "Fuel check. There's a gauge on the left side, round, looks like a clock face." Rustling, then, "Half." "Not a fuel issue." He ran the diagnostic in his mind. "It's almost certainly the starter battery," he said. "Generator batteries drain in cold storage if the tender circuit fails. Is there a set of jumper cables in the building anywhere? Maintenance closet? Loading area?" "I don't—" "Hold on." He heard her moving, the sound of a door, footsteps on concrete. "Yes, there's a set in the loading bay. And a vehicle in the parking lot or loading area you can get keys to?" Longer pause. "Building manager's truck. The spare keys are on the board in the management office. Connect positive to positive, negative to chassis ground on the generator. There's a grounding lug on the lower right, looks like a green bolt. Don't cross them." "Daniel, I know this is a lot to ask." "I'm coming," he said. He was already off the step stool, already moving. "Don't touch anything until I get there. It'll be 20 minutes. He hung up and went to Lily's room. She was in bed, Gerald held against her side, the nightlight making its amber circle on the wall. "I have to go help someone," he said. "Do you remember Sophia's number?" "In my tablet," she said. "I'm going to call her to come sit with you. I'll be back as soon as I can." She looked at him with the large-eyed seriousness of a child deciding whether to be afraid. "Is it Victoria?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded, once, with the finality of someone who has decided that the answer is sufficient reason. "Okay," she said. "Tell her it's storming." "She knows," he said. "She's in it." He called Sophia, who answered immediately, blessedly awake, and said she'd be there in 10 minutes. Her building was 2 blocks away. He pulled on his heaviest work jacket, grabbed his tool bag, kissed Lily's forehead, and went down to the truck in the storm. Boss. Meridian Avenue was a different street in the storm. The rain came at a hard angle, driven by the wind off the open corridor between the downtown buildings, and it found every gap in his jacket with efficient thoroughness. He parked in the building's small lot and ran for the entrance, and the door opened before he reached it. Victoria was there. She had her phone's flashlight on. She was in her work clothes still. She'd been here late, which meant the storm had caught her mid-evening rather than driving her home before it hit. Her hair was loose, slightly windblown from however long she'd been managing the situation, and she looked at Daniel arriving through her door in the rain with an expression that was relief and something warmer than relief combined. "Thank you," she said. "Basement," he said. She led him through the darkened lobby, the battery-powered emergency lights casting their limited orange glow, enough to navigate by, down the stairwell and into the basement. The server room hummed behind its locked door, the steady sound of systems running on borrowed time. The generator stood in the utility area, large and gray, exactly as described. He examined it for 45 seconds. She had been right about the battery. He could smell the cold storage staleness of a unit that hadn't been properly maintained through the fall. The tender circuit had almost certainly failed sometime in October or November, slowly draining the starting battery. "Get the truck," he said. "Pull it to the loading bay door." She went. He found the loading bay door controls, got it open against the storm's resistance, the wind pushing back with body weight, and maneuvered the cables from the rack in the loading area. When Victoria pulled the building manager's truck to the bay door, rain streaming across the windshield, he guided her into position and connected the cables with the steady efficiency of someone who had done variations of this work in conditions ranging from suburban basements to rooftops in high wind. "Give it 2 minutes to transfer charge," he said. They stood in the loading bay in the partial shelter of the overhead door, the rain sheeting past the opening, the truck engine running. The storm pressed against the building and the building held. "How long before the backup fails?" he asked. "Maybe an hour now," she said. "This will work." She stood beside him watching the cables, and in the uncertain light of the emergency system and the truck's running lights, she looked slightly different than he had seen her before. Not without composure, but without the particular professional composure she wore in her building during working hours. She looked like herself, he thought, the self underneath the CEO, the person who had grown up in Cincinnati teaching herself to code because it felt like a language she'd been waiting to find. "Are your servers backed up off-site?" he asked. "Yes, but 2 clients are in live sessions. We'd lose the session data. It's recoverable but messy, and it costs us credibility." She paused. "I know it sounds like a small thing compared to—" "It's not a small thing," he said. "It's your work. It matters." She looked at him. 2 minutes, he said. He tried the manual start. The generator turned over, coughed once, and caught. The deep mechanical thrum of it filled the basement utility space, and the lights came on. Not the full building system, just the generator circuit, covering the critical systems, the server room, the emergency lighting. Enough. Victoria exhaled. It was a particular kind of exhale. The kind that carries something that has been held for a while. She put her hand briefly on the generator housing, as though reassuring herself it was real. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." He disconnected the cables, returned the truck to the loading bay, got the door closed against the wind. He ran a quick check on the generator, fuel, oil level, load distribution, and confirmed it was running stably. When he straightened up, she was standing in the utility room doorway, watching him. "The starter battery needs replacing when this is over," he said. "The tender circuit, too. That's what let it drain in the first place. I can take care of it, or I can tell you what to order." "You take care of it," she said, and then, "Come upstairs." Up. The second-floor office had the particular quality of a space occupied late at night during an emergency. Papers slightly disorganized, 2 coffee cups at different stages of depletion on the desk, the monitors still running the systems she'd been monitoring when the power went out. She had lit 2 candles during the outage and left them burning, and they added a warmth to the room that the overhead emergency lights didn't have. She went to the small credenza where she kept coffee and made 2 cups with the efficiency of someone who had been making her own coffee in this room for years. He sat in the chair across from her desk and accepted the cup she handed him, and they were both quiet for a moment, the storm pressing at the windows, the generator's hum coming up through the building like a pulse. "You came in this?" she said. It was not quite a statement and not quite a question. "You called," he said. She looked at her coffee cup. "I want you to know something," she said, "and I need you to hear it as what it is, not as something I'm saying because you just drove across town in a storm to fix my generator." She paused. "I've been thinking about how to say it for a while, and tonight I don't want to wait for the right moment anymore." "Okay," he said. She looked at him directly, the way she always looked at things she was deciding to be honest about. "I am not interested in a casual version of this," she said. "I know that complicates things. I know your life has specific structures and specific priorities, and I have no intention of disrupting those structures. I mean that genuinely, not as a diplomatic qualifier. Lily is the architecture of your life, and she should be." She held his gaze. "But I want to be in that life, not around the edges of it. In it, in whatever way works for what your life is. I want the Tuesday pasta and the school programs and the terrible water stain on your ceiling that you have presumably now finally fixed. I want the ordinary of it." She paused. I want you. The generator hummed below them. The candles moved slightly in some draft too small to feel. Daniel looked at this woman across the desk. This woman who had said honest things to him from the first afternoon of their acquaintance, who had never once pretended, who had looked at his life and not seen deficit, but had seen exactly what was there, who had crouched to eye level with his daughter without being asked and argued seriously about the protocol for school programs and held a 6-year-old's hand while she received the speaking part that was good, even if Caleb's middle line was better. He thought about the walls he had built, about the particular way that a man who had been careful for a long time could mistake the architecture of safety for the architecture of a life, about the difference between protection and absence, about the water stain on the ceiling finally patched, and how strange it was that it had taken this long to do a repair so clearly needed. "I'm not good at the things your world requires," he said. "Board dinners and investor functions and whatever else. I don't need you in my world," she said. "I need you in my life. Those aren't the same thing." "Victoria, I have spent 6 years building a company and I am good at it, and it matters to me," she said. "And I have spent 6 years choosing the company over everything else, and I am done with that particular version of the choice. I don't want to choose anymore." She paused. "I want both, the work and the life. And I want the life to have you in it." He set down his coffee cup. He stood. He crossed the space between his chair and her side of the desk. Not quickly, not with any drama, the way he moved across most spaces, with the deliberate economy of a man who knew what he was doing and why. And when he was standing in front of her, she stood too, and they were close in the candlelit room with the storm on the windows and the generator keeping the lights on below them. "I'm not going to tell you it's uncomplicated," he said, "because it isn't. There's Lily, and there's the difference in our lives, and there are things we're going to have to work out as we go." "I know," she said. "And I'm not moving fast," he said, "for her sake as much as mine. We go slow, we go carefully, and she always comes first. If that's something you can actually live with, Daniel." She said it with complete steadiness. "I spent an hour tonight watching you parent that child. I don't need you to explain to me why she comes first. I already know it. She stopped, started again. "She already matters to me. She's already in the category of things I think about." He looked at her. "You've known her for 2 months," he said. "Some people," she said quietly, "you know quickly." He thought about October, about a rooftop and iced lemon water and a sentence said with no expectation of return, about 3 days of building repairs that stretched into weeks, that stretched into something neither of them had planned and both of them had chosen with clear eyes as it became clearer. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "Okay," he said again. "We do this. We do it carefully and we do it right. But we do it." Something in her face changed. Not dramatically, not with any performance of relief or happiness, just the quiet shift of a thing that has been uncertain resolving into certainty. She looked at him the way she looked at things she had decided to trust completely. "Okay," she said. Outside, the storm made its noise against the building, and the building held it, the way solid things held weather, absorbing, redirecting, unmoved at its foundation. The generator ran below them with its steady hum. The candles moved in the small, invisible draft. He reached up and pushed the strand of hair from her cheek, the same strand that wind and weather always found, that he had noticed the very first morning he had seen her standing in the parking lot looking up at her own damaged building. And she went still under the gesture with the specific stillness of someone receiving something they have been patient for. "You should call and check your servers," he said. She laughed, the real one. "In a minute," she said. The storm pressed its full weight against the windows. The building absorbed it without complaint. And in the warm and candlelit room on the second floor, with the coffee going cold on the desk and the generator doing its unglamorous essential work below, 2 people stood in the specific gravity of a decision made, not impulsively, not without understanding the weight of it, but with the clear and grounded certainty of people who had looked at the thing honestly and chosen it anyway. The storm would pass. It always did. What it left behind was the question that mattered. And in this room, on this night, with the winter pressing at the glass, the answer to that question was already standing, warm and present and entirely decided in the space between them. The storm cleared before midnight. Daniel knew because he was still awake when it happened. Sitting on the couch in the apartment on Hartwell Street, Sophia long since relieved and paid and sent home, Lily checked on twice and sleeping soundly with Gerald and the new markers on her nightstand. He was drinking the last cup of the evening's coffee, which he rarely did this late but felt earned, and he heard the specific quality of the silence change outside his window. The rain stopping not gradually, but with the particular decisiveness of weather that has accomplished what it came to do. He went to the kitchen window. The street below was washed clean. Water ran in the gutters with purposeful clarity, carrying the debris of the storm toward the drains. The pavement gleamed under the street lamps, black and reflective. Every light doubled in the wet surface. The air, when he cracked the window an inch to check, was cold and absolutely still. The stillness that followed hard weather, when the world seemed to have been rearranged slightly and hadn't yet settled into its new configuration. He stood at the window for a while. He thought about what had been said in a candlelit office 2 hours ago. Not analyzing it, he had made the decision and was not the kind of man who second-guessed decisions he'd made with open eyes, but simply holding it, the way you held something newly real, allowing it to take its full shape. We do this. We do it carefully, and we do it right. But we do it. He had said that. He had meant it completely. And the meaning of it, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, felt not frightening, but solid. The particular solidity of a structure that has been properly built, not rushed, not improvised, but thought through and executed with care. He was a man who understood the difference between a repair that held and a repair that only appeared to hold. This was the kind that held. He went to bed. He slept well, which was itself a kind of answer. In the morning, Lily came into the kitchen while he was making coffee and announced, before anything else, that she had a question. "Okay," he said. She climbed onto the kitchen chair and folded her hands on the table with the formal deliberateness of a small person preparing to address a significant matter. "Is Victoria your girlfriend?" she asked. He turned from the coffee maker and looked at his daughter. She looked back with the large, patient eyes of someone who had been thinking about this and was ready to receive an accurate answer. He considered the word. Girlfriend was a word with particular weight when the person applying it was 6 years and 3/4 old and had only one parent present in the daily architecture of her life. "She's very important to me," he said. "We're still figuring out exactly what that looks like. But yes, in the way you mean, yes." Lily absorbed this. "Do you like her?" "Very much." "Does she like you?" "She does." Lily unfolded her hands and refolded them, which was her processing gesture, the one she made when she was running information through whatever internal system she used to make sense of things. "Does she know about Gerald?" she asked. "She knows about Gerald." "Does she know he only has one eye because you fixed him twice and the second time the thread ran out before you could do the other one?" "I don't think I've told her that specific detail." Lily appeared to consider whether this was a significant omission. She arrived at her conclusion. "You should tell her. It's important context." "I'll add it to the briefing," he said. She got down from the chair, satisfied, and went to get her backpack. At the apartment door, she paused and turned back with the slightly theatrical timing she had developed recently. The timing of a child who had noticed that pausing at exits created emphasis. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "I think it's good," she said, and then she opened the door and went out into the hallway. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he poured his coffee and took it to the window and watched the January morning begin its slow, clear-skied business on Hartwell Street, and he felt the particular satisfaction of a man whose 6-year-old daughter had just given him her considered approval, which was, in the final accounting, the only approval that had ever really mattered. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way that the preceding months had been. There were no confrontations, no storms, no generators failing in the dark. The dramatic architecture of the situation had been resolved. Adrian Cole communicated through counsel on board matters and kept his distance. The professional entanglement managed to the precise degree that Victoria had always known it could be managed if she chose to manage it. The company continued its trajectory. The server systems ran without incident on a properly maintained generator that Daniel had serviced and equipped with a new starter battery and a functioning tender circuit on a Tuesday morning in January, invoiced through Marcus's contracting company, Professionally Clean. What replaced the drama was something that required more careful attention to appreciate, because it was made of smaller things. Victoria came to the apartment on a Saturday in late January for the first time. She brought nothing elaborate, a bottle of good wine and the ingredients for pasta, which she had mentioned once, and which Daniel had quietly noted and said nothing about. She arrived at 4 in the afternoon, which was deliberate because 4 was Lily's active hour, the window of the day when she was at her most expansive, most herself. Lily met her at the door with Gerald extended toward her. "This is Gerald," she said. "He has one eye because Dad's thread ran out. He wanted you to know the context." Victoria took Gerald with both hands and examined him with the careful respect of someone receiving an introduction to a significant individual. "He looks like he has a lot of experience," she said. "He's been through a lot," Lily agreed gravely. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway watching this exchange with the particular feeling of a man observing something that was both new and exactly right, both surprising and entirely inevitable, the way all the best things were. Victoria made the pasta. She had been right that she could. The olive oil and garlic and heavy black pepper, done simply and correctly, filling the small apartment with the smell of a real meal cooked without performance. Lily sat on the counter, which Daniel normally discouraged but allowed tonight, and asked Victoria questions with the steady, methodical curiosity she applied to everything she found interesting, which was most things. "Why do you have a big building?" she asked. "It's not that big," Victoria said, adjusting the heat under the pan. "It has 3 floors, Lily said. "That's big. By some standards, there are buildings with 100 floors. Lily considered this with visible awe. "Do people live at the top?" "Some of them. Aren't they scared?" "Probably not. You get used to it, I think." "I don't think I would," Lily said. "I think I would always be a little scared." She swung her feet against the cabinet below her. "But maybe I'd be brave anyway." "That's usually how it works," Victoria said. "The bravery and the scared happen at the same time." Lily looked at her with new respect. "Dad says something like that," she said. "He says brave just means you do it anyway." "Your dad is right," Victoria said. Lily glanced at Daniel in the doorway, then back at Victoria. Then, with the casual, decisive authority of a child who had completed her evaluation, "You can come over again," she said. Victoria looked at the pasta. Something moved through her expression, something that wasn't quite covered before Lily had turned away to ask another question, and Daniel saw it clearly. He saw what it cost her and what it meant. This small, specific permission from a 6-year-old with one-eyed elephant, and the way she absorbed it without making it into something larger than it was, which was exactly the right way to absorb it. He stayed in the doorway and said nothing, and let the moment be exactly what it was. They ate at the small kitchen table, the 3 of them. The pasta exactly right. The wine poured for 2 adults, while Lily had apple juice in the cup that had been hers since she was 3. She refused to upgrade, on principle. They talked about things that 6-year-olds found important, and things that adults found important and discovered, not for the first time but more completely than before, that the distance between those 2 categories was smaller than people usually assumed. After dinner, Lily showed Victoria the current state of the sketchbook. Rubina and Duchess had acquired friends. There was a 3rd horse named Senator, whose name Lily had chosen because it sounded official, and a 4th named Plain, which Lily explained was short for plain brown, which she insisted was a very dignified name for a horse if you thought about it correctly. "I think Plain is my favorite," Victoria said. Lily looked at her sharply. "Why?" "Because he doesn't need a fancy name to know what he is." A silence. Then Lily nodded slowly with the expression of someone who has heard something important and is filing it correctly. "That's a good reason," she said. Daniel looked at Victoria across the sketchbook, and she looked back at him, and what passed between them in that glance was not complicated, but it was complete. The acknowledgement of a thing that was working, truly working, not because it was easy, but because every person in this small apartment was being honest about who they were and what they needed, and that honesty was the structure that made the rest of it possible. But February arrived and brought with it the particular quality of a month that knows winter is nearly finished but isn't ready to admit it. Cold still, but with an undertone of change in the light, the afternoons lengthening by their few minutes daily as the year turned toward itself. Victoria's company closed its latest funding round in the first week of February. Daniel heard about it on the phone the evening it happened. She called him, and her voice had the specific quality of someone standing on the other side of a thing they've worked toward for a long time, the quality that is not purely joy, but is something more durable, satisfaction, the deep and honest kind that doesn't need an audience. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like I want to cook pasta on a Tuesday," she said. He laughed. "It's Wednesday." "Close enough," she said. He heard the smile in it and felt his own. "Come over Thursday," he said. "I'll make the pasta. Lily's been asking for the garlic version anyway." "Tell her I'll bring the dessert." "What kind?" "Whatever she wants. Tell her to name it, and I'll figure it out." He relayed this to Lily the next morning, and she deliberated with enormous seriousness for 4 minutes before declaring, "Chocolate cake with the kind of frosting that goes in a thick layer and doesn't taste like air." He passed this specification to Victoria, who found it entirely reasonable, and arrived Thursday with a cake from a bakery in the short north that met every requirement, including the frosting, which Lily assessed with 1 bite and declared correct. "She has very precise standards," Victoria said to Daniel while Lily conducted her second assessment. "She gets that from somewhere," he said. Victoria looked at him sideways. "You say that about everything she does." "Because it's always true," he said. She shook her head, but she was smiling, the full, unhurried smile that he had been watching emerge more easily over the past weeks, the one that appeared now without the particular conscious management she had once applied to all her public expressions. She smiled in his kitchen the way she'd smiled nowhere else he'd seen her, and he recognized that for what it was, a person being safe enough to be unguarded. He was glad he could give her that. It was a quieter gift than the generator, less dramatic, less visible, but more fundamental. Spring came to Columbus on a Sunday in late March, or at least announced its intentions. A temperature 10 degrees warmer than the week before. The trees along Hartwell Street showing the first tightly closed promise of buds. The sidewalks releasing the particular mineral smell of frost-thawed ground. They went to the park. It was Lily's idea, produced at breakfast with the executive confidence she applied to plans she had already decided were happening. "We should go to the park today. All 3 of us. Gerald can stay home because it's a real outing." Daniel had looked at Victoria across the kitchen table. She had started staying some nights in the spare room, practically at first, and then as a simple extension of the rhythm they had settled into, accommodated without drama, explained to Lily with the matter-of-fact directness that Lily had responded to with a single question. "Does she have pajamas here?" "Yes." "Okay." And Victoria had looked back at him with her eyebrow at its slight elevation, which was her expression for "this is good, say yes." "Okay," he said to Lily. "The park." The park was Clement Park, 4 blocks from the apartment, a modest neighborhood green space with mature oaks and a paved path that circled its perimeter, and a small pond where ducks wintered and now, in late March, were beginning their own recalibrations. Lily ran ahead on this path with the purposeful, direction-changing energy of a child who has been indoor-bound through a Columbus winter and is now given horizontal space and permission. Daniel and Victoria walked. They walked the way they had been learning to walk together, close but not performing closeness, talking and not talking in the natural rhythm of 2 people comfortable enough with each other's silence that silence was no longer something to fill. He had her hand. That had become the ordinary thing, her hand in his, without ceremony. The way ordinary things became ordinary when you stopped marking them and simply lived them. "I've been thinking about something," Victoria said. "Tell me." "I want to restructure my schedule." She was looking at the path ahead. "I've been running at full capacity without differentiation for 6 years. Every hour available goes to the company, and the hours when I'm not actively working, I'm still available, still on call in some functional sense." She paused. "I want to stop doing that." "What does the restructuring look like?" "I want 2 evenings a week that are genuinely protected. No calls, no mail, nothing. And I want to move more decision authority to my leadership team. I've been centralizing because that's how you survive the early stages, but we're past the early stages, and centralization is starting to cost more than it protects." She glanced at him. "I told my COO last week," she cried. "I think she's been waiting for me to say it for a year." "How did that feel?" "Like putting down something heavy I'd been carrying so long I stopped noticing the weight." She paused. "Like fixing a thing that had been broken for a while." He smiled at that. I know that feeling. I imagine you do. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about moving. My building is fine, but it's 20 minutes from here in traffic, and it's functionally a hotel room in terms of how I actually live in it. She looked at him carefully. I'm not talking about here. I don't mean anything precipitous, but something in this direction, this neighborhood. So Lily's within walking distance, he said. A pause. So everyone I want to see regularly is within walking distance, she said. Lily is part of that. You are part of that. Differently, but both. He thought about the apartment on Hartwell Street, about the water stain that was no longer there, about the walls he had built carefully and deliberately, and the specific choice to lower them, not remove them, because a man with a child never fully removed his walls, but to lower them enough to let real things in. There's a building on Clement, he said, 3 blocks north of the park, converted from a commercial property, older, good bones. I've seen the listing. She turned to look at him. You've seen the listing, she said. I pay attention to buildings, he said. She studied his face for a moment. Then she said, You've been thinking about this too. For a while, he said simply. She turned back to the path ahead. Her hand tightened slightly in his. Not dramatically, just the specific pressure of acknowledgement, the kind of contact that said, I hear you, without requiring words. Good bones, she said. Very good bones, he said. The kind where what goes wrong can be fixed, and the fixing holds. She looked at him with the expression that had started on an October afternoon as something he couldn't quite name and had become, over months of honest conversation and quiet accumulated knowing, one of his favorite things in the world. The expression that was entirely her, unguarded, clear, the face of a person choosing to see and be seen. I know someone who knows about buildings, she said. Convenient, he said. Deck. Lily had found the ducks. She was standing at the edge of the pond 50 feet ahead, hands on knees, in deep consultation with 3 mallards who were receiving her full professional attention. She was explaining something to them. They could hear the rhythm of her voice from where they stood, instructional in cadence, patient in delivery, the tone of someone who believed that if you explained things clearly enough, understanding would follow. What do you think she's telling them? Victoria asked. Impossible to say, Daniel said. Could be anything from the migratory patterns of waterfowl to the correct naming conventions for horses. Or both? Definitely both, he said. They stood watching her. The park moved around them in its early spring quiet. A jogger on the far side of the path, a couple with a stroller moving slowly, the oak branches beginning their long exhale from winter toward green. The light in late March had a particular quality, slanted and forgiving, the kind that made everything look slightly more like itself than usual. Victoria leaned slightly against him, the unhurried weight of someone settling. He adjusted, making room without making an issue of it, the small, wordless accommodation of 2 people who had learned the physical language of each other's presence. She's going to need a real bicycle this summer, he said, after a while. She's been asking since January. What kind does she want? She described it as medium blue, not too fast, not too slow, with a basket for important objects. Gerald goes in the basket, Victoria said immediately. Obviously. I'll help look, she said. If that's... Yes, he said, before she could qualify it further. Yes, that's welcome. That's wanted. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said, just that. At the pond, Lily had apparently concluded her consultation with the ducks and was now crouched, examining something in the muddy grass at the water's edge with scientific focus. She picked it up, a stone, flat and oval, the kind made for skipping, and turned it in her fingers, then looked up and found them watching her. She held up the stone. She cocked her arm. She sent it skipping across the surface of the pond. 1, 2, 3, 4 contacts with the water before it sank, and turned back to them with the expression of someone who has just done something they needed witnesses for. 4, she announced across the distance. I saw, Daniel called back. She looked satisfied. She went back to examining the mud. She's been working on skipping stones since October, he said to Victoria. She got it from a YouTube video and has been practicing at every available body of water. 4 is good, Victoria said. She'll want 5 by summer. She'll get 5 by summer, Victoria said, with the certainty of someone who had been watching Lily long enough to understand how she moved through the world. The same steadiness, the same patient accumulation toward a goal, the same refusal to be discouraged by the attempts that didn't land. Like father, Daniel thought, and felt the truth of it, without needing to say it. They walked the full perimeter of the park, the three of them eventually together when Lily rejoined them at the north end of the path, still holding the skipping stone. She walked between them for a while with the complete unself-consciousness of a child who had decided that this was simply the configuration of her people, and that there was nothing unusual about it, and that the world should arrange itself accordingly. At one point she took Victoria's hand, without preamble, simply reaching up and closing her fingers around it the way she reached for Daniel's. The automatic, trusting gesture of a child who has decided that a person belongs in the hand-holding category. Victoria went very still for one step, just one, and then she was walking again, and her thumb moved slightly against Lily's small fingers, the quiet, instinctive response of someone who had been handed something precious and was being careful with it. Daniel saw all of this and said nothing. Some moments you didn't annotate. You just walked through them and let them be what they were. They got back to the apartment at 2 in the afternoon. Lily announced that she needed to work on the sketchbook because the outing had given her ideas, and disappeared to her room with the markers and Gerald and the focused purpose of an artist with material to process. Victoria stood in the kitchen doorway. "I should go back to the city," she said. "I have calls this afternoon." "Monday morning," he reminded her. It was one of the protected evenings she had designated. "Monday evening," she confirmed. "I'll bring food." "Lily will want the chocolate cake again." "I know," she said. "I already asked the bakery to hold one." She looked at him across the small kitchen with the expression that was simply and completely hers. "I planned ahead." "You retain details," he said. "CEO brain," she said. "It works on things other than business, apparently." He crossed the kitchen and she didn't move, and they were in the particular close geography of the apartment, the small domestic space that was his whole carefully constructed life. And she was in it with the ease of someone who had been let in completely and had arrived and stayed without changing a single essential thing. He put his hand on her face, the gesture he'd made first on a January night in a candlelit office, the strand of hair pushed from her cheek, and she leaned into it slightly, the same small yielding, and her eyes were on his. "Victoria," he said. "I know," she said. She'd been saying that since October, in various configurations, and it was always true. She always did know. She was the most honestly perceptive person he had ever stood in front of. "No," he said. "This is new." She looked at him. "I love you," he said, simply and directly, and with the specific, clear weight of a man who does not say things he does not mean, who does not offer what he isn't prepared to maintain, who has understood from the beginning that what he was careful about was worth being careful about, and that when you finally said the real thing, you said it plainly so there was no ambiguity about what it was. The kitchen was quiet around them. Somewhere in the apartment, Lily was narrating something to herself in the low, absorbed tone of deep creative work. Outside the window, the late March afternoon was doing its light-shifting thing. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright. She didn't look away. "I love you," she said. And then, because she was herself and would not let a real moment pass without the specific honesty that was her most fundamental quality, "I've loved you since the roof in October. I've just been waiting until you were ready to hear it." He breathed in slowly. "I was ready before that," he said. "I know," she said, "but some things need to be said at the right time, not just the true time." He leaned forward and kissed her, not for the first time, but with the particular deliberateness of a first time in a new register, in the kitchen of his apartment on a Sunday afternoon in March, with his daughter 20 feet away narrating the continuing saga of horses with dignified names, and the park's early spring still visible through the window, and the water stain above the bedroom ceiling freshly patched and painted and gone. When he pulled back, she was smiling, the full one, unhurried, completely unmanaged, the one that had been one of his favorite sounds before he knew it was one of his favorite sights as well. "Plain was your favorite horse," he said. "Plain has always been my favorite," she said. "Because he doesn't need a fancy name to know what he is," he said. "Because he doesn't need a fancy name to know what he is," she agreed. Later, after Victoria had gone and Lily had shown him the day's new additions to the sketchbook, Senator had acquired a saddle, as she had promised, stitched in blue. And dinner had been made and eaten, and the dishes done, and the evening wound through its usual chapters toward its usual end. Daniel sat on the couch while Lily brushed her teeth and looked at the hallway ceiling. The patch was good. He had done it correctly. You couldn't see where the stain had been unless you looked very carefully and knew exactly where to look. And even then, it was only a slight variation in the texture of the paint, invisible from any normal angle. Fixed. Done. The way solid repairs were done. Lily appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, Gerald under her arm, her hair in the braids she had taken to sleeping in since she'd seen a video about protecting natural hair texture, which she had explained to Daniel with technical thoroughness, and which he had accepted as fully reasonable. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Is Victoria going to be around for a long time?" He looked at his daughter. The nightlight was on in her room behind her, the amber glow making a halo of her braided hair, and she was looking at him with the patient, clear-eyed directness that she had been deploying her entire life. The gaze of a child who understood that real answers were better than comfortable ones and had always been willing to wait for them. He thought about everything the last 6 months had been, about a rooftop in October and iced lemon water and a sentence that had started something neither of them had planned. About a woman who had crouched to eye level and argued seriously about Rubina's artistic merit and held a small hand in a December gymnasium and arrived in a January storm and made pasta in this kitchen and walked beside a pond in the first light of spring. About the difference between a life built for safety and a life built for truth, and how the best ones were built for both. About Plain, who didn't need a fancy name to know what he was. "Yes," he said, "for a long time." Lily looked at him steadily. Then she nodded, once the definitive nod of someone who has received a correct answer and is satisfied with it, and went to her room and climbed into bed and pulled the yellow comforter up and held Gerald against her chest and closed her eyes. He stood in the doorway for 10 seconds, exactly 10, the way he always did. She was breathing slowly, peacefully. The nightlight made its amber circle on the wall. He pulled the door gently closed. He stood in the quiet hallway of his small apartment on Hartwell Street and felt the full, grounded weight of his life. All of it. The work, and the waking at 4:47, and the careful pasta, and the braided hair, and the skipping stones, and the patched ceiling, and the woman whose number was saved in his phone as Victoria, and who had said, "I've loved you since the roof," in October in his kitchen this afternoon, with the same honesty she had said everything, every true thing, from the beginning. It was not a perfect life. He had never wanted a perfect life. Perfect was an engineering fantasy, the structure that looked correct on paper and failed under real conditions. What he had wanted, what he had built, was a life that held, that absorbed the weather, that fixed what needed fixing and maintained what mattered and knew the difference between the two. He walked to the kitchen window one last time. The Hartwell Street night was clear and cold, the January storm 4 months behind them, the park's early spring 3 hours behind him. The street lamp threw its orange cone on the clean pavement. Somewhere down the block, the neighbor's porch light was on. The world was quiet. He looked at it for 30 seconds. Not 10, 30, because some evenings warranted the extra time, and he thought, this. Not, this is enough, or this will do, or any of the managed-down versions of happiness that a careful man talked himself into. Just this life, this apartment, this daughter asleep down the hall with her one-eyed elephant and her sketchbook full of horses with dignified names. This woman who had appeared on a roof in October and stayed honestly and completely because the stain was real. This. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He slept the deep, uncomplicated sleep of a man who had done the work, all of it, the physical and the harder kind, and found that the ground held exactly as he had built it to hold, because he had been careful and true, and in the end, brave enough to let the walls come down where it mattered. Outside on Hartwell Street, the night went on its quiet way, indifferent to ordinary miracles and small, real happinesses in love that had begun not with grand gestures or perfect timing or the right circumstances, but with a sentence said honestly on an autumn afternoon and two people willing to follow it all the way to where it led. Which was here. Which had always been here. Which was, in the final and most essential accounting, exactly enough.